بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين، وبعد. نرحب بكم جميعا إخواني في هذا اللقاء العلمي، نسأل الله عز وجل أن يكون ثريا، وهي عن تجربة منظمة أرنوفا في تنظيم المؤتمرات العلمية في مجال العمل الخيري والتطوعي. وهذه التجربة تجربة ثرية لها الآن 44 سنة في تنظيم المؤتمرات. فزيارة الدكتور شارق إلى السعودية لأخذ العمرة كانت فرصة طيبة، واستغلوها إخواننا في مؤسسة عبد الرحمن بن صالح الراجحي جزاهم الله خير لاستضافة الدكتور والاستفادة مما لديه من تجارب وخبرة، ونقل هذه التجارب إلى الإخوة العاملين في مجال العمل الخيري. فكان هذا اللقاء المشترك بين مركز مداد لأبحاث العمل الخيري ومؤسسة عبد الرحمن بن صالح الراجحي الخيرية للاستفادة من هذه التجربة من أخونا شارق. النقطة اللي أحب أنا أنبه لها أو أذكرها في هذا اللقاء أن التجارب والمؤتمر السنوي لأرنوفا فيه كثير من الأفكار الإبداعية في الاستفادة من الأبحاث والدراسات، فيه كثير من الطرح العلمي النظري والطرح العلمي التطبيقي في العمل الخيري. فهذه كلها في كل مؤتمر تقريبا فوق 400 ورقة عمل تعرض، وهذا كم هائل جدا في المؤتمرات أن يتم عرض 400 ورقة وأكثر من ذلك في 12 أو 13 محور من المحاور العلمية في مجال العمل الخيري. لا شك أنه فيه ثراء علمي قوي جدا جدا للعمل الخيري. فمثل هذه التجربة المفيدة وإن كانت باللغة الإنجليزية، أحببنا أن نستفيد كيف تعمل وكيف تصنع مثل هذه المؤتمرات، حتى نستطيع أن نستفيد من هذه التجربة ونقدم مثلها في السعودية، هنا في السعودية أو في أي دولة من دول الخليج أو دول العالم العربي، حتى نثري هذا القطاع بالأبحاث والدراسات التي هي المحور الرئيسي في التطوير. المعلومات والأبحاث والدراسات هي المحور الرئيسي للتطوير للعمل الخيري. ونترككم مع أخونا إبراهيم الحيدري، الدكتور إبراهيم الحيدري، لتولى إدارة اللقاء. وقبل أن ذلك نسمع كلمة الإخوة في مؤسسة عبد الرحمن بن صالح، لهم كلمة الشيخ موسى.
طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. صبحكم الله بالخير. اليوم ما شاء الله جينا المكان دفى لأن أيام برد، فالحمد لله ما شاء الله جدة اليوم ذلك ستنسال الأفكار والعقول اليوم في هذا المكان. كانت متجمدة بعض الأماكن تحت الصفر درجة الحرارة، ما شاء الله اليوم يوم نزلنا يقول درجة الحرارة 19 مدري 15 كذا. وحقيقة في البداية أنا سعيد جدا بهذه الكوكبة من الفضلاء من العاملين في العمل الخيري، وسعيد جدا أننا أمام قامة من قامات العمل الخيري والدكتور شارق في هذه المسيرة الطويلة التي لها أكثر من 4 عقود من الزمن، وهذا الاستمرار هو دليل نجاح. وهذا النجاح يقف خلفه أناس يؤمنون بهذه القضية وهذا النجاح. حقيقة اليوم نريد أن نسمع هذه التجربة ونعرض ما عندنا في هذا البلد المعطاء من تجارب متميزة ورائعة. والتجربة هذه صراحة وغيرها من التجارب مهم جدا أن نستفيد منها ونوائمها أنها تعمل وفق بيئتنا ووفق المعطيات الموجودة عندنا. هذا اللقاء نشكر فيه مركز مداد، فهم الذين قاموا بهذا الجهد المبارك والرائع، استقبال وحفاوة وترتيب وتجاوز عدد من الصعوبات، جزاهم الله خير. وإحنا مزعجين لهم كل يوم نقول لهم يمين يسار، لكن هم ما شاء الله جزاهم الله خير. ونشكر كذلك الدكتور إبراهيم جزاه الله خير على إدارة اللقاء. أول ما كلمته كان متحمس وفرح جدا أنه يقدم هذه المعلومة الثرية لكم، وتاج الشكر لكم صراحة. كم تغمرني الفرحة والسعادة أن أرى وأجلس مع هذه الكوكبة التي نستفيد منها. اليوم ليس عندي أي شيء نقدم ولا نقول إلا أننا نقدم لكم هذه التجربة. هذه هي الثمرة وهي النتيجة التي نريد أن نقدمها لكم اليوم. فهي ليس ملتقى لا كلمات منبرية ولا نصائح، وإنما هي هذه التجربة هي ثمرة إن شاء الله هذا اللقاء. أترككم مع الدكتور إبراهيم والدكتور شارق ليتولوا هذا العمل إلى إن شاء الله حسب المنظمين وهو موزع عندهم بكل التفاصيل. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. حياكم الله أيها الأحبة في هذا اللقاء الفريد الحقيقة. لقاءاتنا عادة فيها نوع من شكرا. في هذا اللقاء الفريد احنا اليوم يعني بين أيدينا ما شاء الله قامة من قامات العمل الخيري العالمي، ولا يصح أن نسميه العمل الخيري الأمريكي، لأنه يعني تجربة وخبرة الأخ شارق يعني تتجاوز حدود أمريكا، وصلت إلى أفريقيا وإلى آسيا وإلى الأقلية الإسلامية داخل أمريكا وأيضا الأقليات الأخرى. خبرة رائعة جدا وجهد ثري جدا، وهو الآن يتسنم يعني منظمة تعتبر من المنظمات الرائدة والقائدة في عملية البحث العلمي، ونحن نستمع إليه. الحقيقة أقترح على نفسي وعليكم أن نستحضر البيئة التي تعمل فيها أرنوفا. فأرنوفا على سبيل المثال تعمل في بيئة فيها ما لا يقل عن 50 جامعة أمريكية تقدم شهادة دكتوراه في العمل الخيري أو عمل غير ربحي أو الأعمال المرتبطة بذلك. وفيها ما لا يقل عن 200 أو أكثر أيضا جامعة تقدم ماجستير في هذا التخصص أو في حوله، بالإضافة إلى أن هناك فعاليات كبيرة جدا، بالإضافة هناك يعني عوامل أخرى تجعل من استثمار البحث العلمي في اتخاذ القرار أو في صناعة القرار قضية ممكنة ومتيسرة. لقاءنا اليوم بمشيئة الله عز وجل سوف ينقسم إلى قسمين أساسيين. القسم الأول سوف يتكلم أخونا شارق عن المنظمة ككل، قصتها. منظمة عمرها ما لا يقل عن 42 سنة تقريبا، وأيضا كان لي أظن إن شاء الله الدكتور شارق سوف يذكر أثر المنظمات المانحة في نجاح هذه المنظمة، في نجاح هذا الكيان البحثي، وأنه كيف استطاعت منظمة مانحة في عمر هذه أو في تجربة هذه الجهة البحثية أن يكون لها أثر قوي ومثمر لا ينساه القائمون على المنظمة على أرنوفا. القسم الثاني سوف يتكلم بالتفصيل عن كيف إدارة المؤتمرات العلمية التي تكون كبيرة بحجم أرنوفا. الإخوة اللي شاركوا في أرنوفا في الأعوام السابقة شاهدوا الحقيقة احتفالية كبيرة جدا لا تكاد أن توصف. نحن نتكلم عن آلاف الحضور، نتكلم عن مئات الأوراق العلمية، نتكلم عن مهرجان الحقيقة يستمر 3 أيام 4 أيام. الجامع بينهم هو موضوع الكونفرنس أو موضوع البحث، موضوع المؤتمر. نحن سعداء جدا بك دكتور شارق، أهلا وسهلا بك في السعودية، والميكروفون بين يديك الآن. وأتمنى الحقيقة أن نبدأ في البداية أن نضع الفرصة ونترك الفرصة للدكتور شارق أن يقدم، ثم في الفترة اللي بعدها يصير فيه النقاش والمداخلات.
جزاك الله خيرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I wanted to thank Brother Ibrahim for such a warm introduction. It's been an honor getting to know you. We met in Colorado a few years ago. I also wanted to thank Mdad Center, the Al Raji Foundation, to make today's event possible. Actually, in fact, I want to thank Al Raji Foundation for making it possible for me to be here in Saudi Arabia and have all these different meetings. MashaAllah, and I've had a diverse number of meetings with civil society organizations, foundations, and now, MashaAllah, and research centers, and now, alhamdulillah, with some leading people in the field of building conferences in the country. So, Jazakallahu khairan. You know, and I'm humbled by the introduction. You know, everything that is good in me and in all of us comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He had a plan that brought us here. All that is bad, of course, is mine. So as I speak today, I ask that you, you know, all that is good, you praise Allah, and all that I make mistakes on, I ask that you forgive me for my shortcomings. But Jazakallahu khairan, it's a pleasure to be here. Just to start a little bit about arnova. Arnova was formed in 1971. And I remember this date really well because I was born in 1971. So it's so I think we were destined to be together. And arnova was established in 1971 when this field was not recognized by anybody. So when you are a researcher, an economist, or a historian, or a political affairs, or any of those, and you try to do research in this field, people would say, this is not a field. Don't waste your time. Don't do research in this area. And so this was a problem because there were people that were passionate about this. If you were a practitioner and you were interested in making a nonprofit better through theory, they would say, there's no theory. Just go do, this is not a field. Don't worry about it. And if you were a policy person, government official or something like that, that wanted to think about how to make this world a better place using this kind of work, people would say, this is just something that happens. You don't need to focus on how to do it. This will just happen. This government has nothing to do with this activity. So in 1971, it was a challenge. Where can all these people go? So it's interesting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes makes things happen in a specific way. These people came together and started presenting research to each other. And there's two important things about this story that I think I'd like you to sort of glean. One, it was multidisciplinary. So normally if you're a historian, you will only present in historical associations, right? If you are an economist, you will present to economists. You won't talk, historians and economists don't talk to each other. But because there was so few of these people, they had to come and present to each other. And they had to share their research with each other. So that's one. The second thing is, we are a scholarly association. We are a society, we are an association that's focused on making civil society better through research. So most scholarly associations only have researchers there. Right? So if you go to American Historical Association or the Economist Association, you'll only see scholars there, right? Those of you that have been to ISTAR, International Society for Third Sector Research, very strong, also like arnova, very good conference, right? You've been there and presented. Top-notch conference. But they are only scholars, right? There's not practice people there, not policy people, because it's focused. But arnova came about by all of these things. So there are people that do practice, are workers, they work in NGO, but they're interested in research as well, because they know research will help them do their job better. So the two things that are important for arnova to where, and I will come later to what that meant in the long run, but arnova started as a meeting point for diverse groups of people, multidisciplinary and multi-professional. And this, I believe, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made, which is why we are so successful today. Alhamdulillah. So that's one key thing. Then the second thing is that the organization started doing research. Their members, it's a membership-based association. Members did research. We published a journal, the Nonprofit Voluntary Sector Quarterly. And it's called NVSQ, and NVSQ currently is considered to be the leading journal in the field. It's #1 in our field. Amongst all social interest journals, it's ranked 7th, based on impact factors. So that's significant in a 40-year history. And there are 2 samples here, inshallah. We can pass them around if that's okay, just so that you can see this. And this is a peer-reviewed academic journal. And I'll talk about a little bit about peer review and so on. So that's this. So the conference is one. The journal is the other thing that we do. The third thing that we do is we routinely have special programs like symposiums or events where we bring together how do you take research and practice and inform policy. So we do the symposium on public policy and nonprofits. This was funded by, this was an idea of Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, not Ford, Kresge Foundation, Gates Foundation, and Mott Foundation. And so we bring together scholars, practitioners, and policy people who talk about research, who talk about policy, and this impacts public policy. So these are some of the things that arnova does. And so arnova was continuing along, but it was a very small organization because, you know, this organization was in infancy. And then in 1975, something very important happened. Dr. Bert Weisbrod, who's an economist at Northwestern University in Chicago, wrote the seminal piece that said that the NGO sector, the philanthropic sector, the civil society, is a distinct sector. That the economics related to a nonprofit is different than government, it's different than business. And in many ways, the current field of philanthropy, even though philanthropy has existed for thousands and thousands of years, right? Philanthropy is not new. But as a field of distinct study, the birth of this field is in 1975, 4 years after arnova. And Dr. Bert Weisbrod was one of our members. And this discussion was a result of those first 4 years of these conferences coming together, right? So Dr. Bert Weisbrod writes this in 1975, and then some research continues. Another seminal time is 1994. In 1994, a bunch of researchers go to the Lilly Endowment, which is a major foundation in Indiana. And they say, look, there's this sector, this is the research about it, but in order to make this research be independent, have its own research, have its own best practices, we need to have a discipline around this. And so the Lilly Endowment gives Indiana University $40 million. And $40 million creates the Center on Philanthropy. Today it's known as the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. My PhD is from there. It's the first PhD program in this field in philanthropy. They did the master's program and so on. But at that time, the Center on Philanthropy went to Lilly Endowment again and said, look, we are producing researchers and scholars, but where will they produce? Where will they share their research? And so they convinced the Lilly Endowment and other foundations. There were Ford was there, and a bunch of Mott was there, and other foundations. This is pre-Gates, and they provided funding for arnova to be the incubation. So you need someone to come in and put the money to spark an idea. And in 1994, mashallah, and arnova's offices moved from Washington, D.C. to Indiana University, which is where we are today. My office is across the street from Indiana University in Indianapolis. And this is important. And then from there, you see arnova numbers go up, our journal numbers and so on. When I took over 3 years ago, our membership was at 800. Our conference attendees in my first conference was Hartford, Connecticut. I know Mdad Center was there. We had around 500 people there and 800 members. This year, we had 1,250 members arnova worldwide. And at this Chicago conference, where we had a really amazing, Brother Musa was there, and we had a really strong delegation from Saudi Arabia, we had 850 members. As we mentioned, we have 3 days of conference workshops. At any given time, we have 10 time slots. At one time slot, there are as many between 20 and 24 parallel sessions going on. So this is the scope of where mashallah, the organization has come. But And while today, just to talk about arnova, just financially a little bit, is arnova today, while initially it started, there was a lot of funding from foundations, right? But now foundation funding is only one small. In fact, I say arnova is a stool, and it has 4 stools with it, 4 legs. Our conference produces, our budget is around $1 million a year. Our conference produces around $250,000 in revenue, so 250,000, 25%. Our membership is 10% of our revenue. The journal that you see, we get royalty income from this because of we contracted with Sage. That this year will produce, in 2016, will most likely bring in around $200,000 a year in income based on the intellectual property and copyright and people subscribing to it. And then foundations represent around 20-25%. But mashallah, over the last 3 years, we've specifically built Arnova's financial model such that if foundation money didn't exist, Arnova would continue to operate. So our conference breaks even, all of that does. So foundation money we really use just for innovation, entrepreneurial. So Arnova is now at a stage where it's not a question of will Arnova survive. Financially, alhamdulillah, everything will continue. Foundation money is now used for innovation. But it took us 40-something years to get here. It wasn't, you required that initial investment up front. And I bring that in just because later on there's a question about how do you fund these activities. And the other key point I wanted to bring out, the first 2, multidisciplinary, multi-practice, but institutions like Arnova and conferences like Arnova require strategic investments by visionary philanthropists, because that's how you're going to make a sustainable program over the long run. And you build for sustainability, but you start out with an investment by someone, by a university, by an institution, or something like that. So with that, if it's okay, I'll transition to the specifics.
There is one question about the managerial structure of Arnova.
Yes, absolutely. Arnova has a board of directors, and our board of directors are elected. So we have, they're elected by our membership. So anybody that is a member of Arnova, they pay a membership due, then they can elect the Arnova board. So the board consists of an executive committee, which has officers. So you have president, and then you have a second position. It is either president-elect or past president, because we want there to be a 1-year overlap between when a president leaves and a new president comes in. So a president's term is usually for 4 years. 1 year as president-elect, 2 years as president, and 1 year as past president. Then we have secretary, who is elected for 2 years, and they can only be elected for a second term. So the maximum a person in a position of secretary can be 4 years. And we have a treasurer, same thing as secretary. Then we have, so that's 4 members, and then we have 11 at-large board members. And they have staggered terms. And a board member has a term of 3 years, and they can only serve 2 consecutive terms, so a maximum of 6 years. So we have 15 board members, and then I, as executive director, am an ex officio member of the board. And the editors of the journal are also ex officio members of the board. Then, in addition to that, the way we create, just to provide a little bit of information about how. So the Arnova board has many committees, and we do a lot of our work through committees: finance committee, conference committee, publications committee, and so on. One committee is the nominations committee. The nominations committee reaches out to the membership and says, these are the positions open, nominate people. Nominate yourself, nominate others. So that list is generated. Then they send out an email to all the board members saying, do you know people that should be nominated? And that list is added. The executive director, of course, I identify based on people that I've worked with, and I put. And then the nominations committee then puts together a small list. And then this list goes to the board approves it, and then we go to the ballot. Our percentage is for every position that is run, not for the officer position, not president, secretary, and treasurer, but for all other at-large members. If there are 4 positions open, we have 6 people running for it. So it's not 2 people for every spot. It's and these elections happen nearly every year. Arnova is a 501c3 nonprofit charitable organization. The other interesting thing, and I don't know how in the Saudi context nonprofits work. So in the American context, and specifically in Arnova's context, the board's job is three things. One, to hire an executive director. Second, to come up with the strategic vision of the organization. And third, to create oversight over the organization. The hiring of staff, the operation, the management, and all that, that is the responsibility of the executive director. So the foundation, the board doesn't get involved in that stuff. Now, of course, there's a lot of communication between the executive director and the leaders because, you need expertise to do your job, and you don't have all that expertise. But those 15 people have a lot of knowledge and so on. But the executive director really runs the organization completely from the management and so on, with the help of the board when needed. Great.
احنا الان خلصنا الله يعطيكم العافيه من الخطوه الاولى او البارت الاول، وهو اللي يتكلم عن ارنوفا. راح ننتقل الان نتكلم عن شيء بالتفصيل عن المؤتمر نفسه، وعن كيفيه ادارته وكيفيه دعمه وكيفيه تكوين لجانه، وايضا تقييم الاوراق العلميه فيه والخدمات المصاحبه للمؤتمر، مثل التشبيك والتدريب والمعارض اللي تقام على جانب المؤتمر هذا. قبل أن ننتقل، في أحد عنده إضافة أو أسئلة؟ أخوي بدر. أوكي. الأخ بدر يسأل عن الفريق التنفيذي لأرنوفا، ليس للمؤتمر نفسه، لأرنوفا، وهل هناك دور للمتطوعين داخل أرنوفا كمنظمة؟
So volunteers play an incredibly important role within Arnova. In fact, Brother Ibrahim and I were discussing this earlier. If it weren't for volunteers, Arnova has a staff of around 4 or 5 people, so it's not very big. But if we did not have volunteers, we would have to have 15 to 20, around 200 volunteers every year put together the Arnova conference. And I'll talk about a little bit about the committees and the peer review process and all of that. But volunteers are incredibly important. Just because there's only so much that you can pay for in order for the economics. So actually, in many ways, the fifth stool, which is, I appreciate you bringing that up, the fifth stool for Arnova is the volunteers.
هو الإشكال هنا ما يعرف المفهوم اللي هنا. طيب أنا ممكن أجاوب نيابة عنه. يعني إلى حد ما، إحنا طبعا ما عندنا شيء مفهوم اسمه، ما عندنا جمعية منظمة خيرية غير ربحية قانونيا هنا، لكن مفهومه نفسه يعني عالمي، هو ليس علاقة بوطن معين أو بدولة معينة. إن سمحت لي طبعا يعني أجاوب، لأنه ما يعرف النظام هنا. أكرمك الله. أبو همام تفضل. كيف كانت مبادرة؟ ممتاز. كيف انطلقت شرارة يعني أرنوفا؟ هل هي كانت عبارة عن مجموعة من الناس، شخص واحد تحت مظلة جامعة أو خارج مظلة الجامعة وما إلى ذلك؟
So when it started, it was largely individual people that started it. So our founder is David Horton Smith. He's been very involved with Mdad Center. I know he's involved with some Saudi universities as well. He's a visiting. He must be upwards of 80s, but he is the most energetic man I have met. He may be above upwards of 70, and we're on tape, so I don't know how old, but he acts like he's 21 years old. He's got a lot of energy, mashallah. But it was individual efforts. But there was a partnership with universities in a very important way. So in order for Arnova to be able to get people to come to its conference, people have to pay to come there, right? It wasn't free. So universities helped Arnova by paying for their scholars to come and present their research. So it's an individual event, association, individual effort. And that's why it's a membership-based organization. Individual members made it a success. But universities were very important partners. Universities and think tanks like Urban Institute and so on. One other small thing I would just add, if you're interested in just some of our financials and those kinds of things, on the Arnova website, if you go under About Us, there's a place that says Statements and Reports. There are two important documents there that you can download and review. One is every year we file the 990 report, which is we tell the government what we spent money for, how much money we brought in, what we spent it for, and so on. So that's a government 990 document. It's available. You can download it. The second thing is that we are audited by our independent chartered accountants every year, and that report is put onto our website. So both are available on our website.
أنا ودي أضيف إلى الآن في خاطري يعني سؤال عبد الرحمن. هم طبعا عندهم نظامين، عندهم المنظمات غير الربحية بشكل كامل، وعندهم داخل هذا القطاع المنظمات الخيرية التي تستقبل تبرعات. فأرنوفا عبارة عن 501 سي يسمونها، أو 503 سي اللي تستقبل التبرعات. فهي جمعية خيرية بمعنى أصح، وأنشأت هذا الكيان وأنشأت هذا التغيير وقادت التغيير على مستوى العالم وليس على مستوى أمريكا فقط. هذا هو السؤال ولا في بعد شيء؟ أجل لو تسأل تعيد السؤالين كلهم دكتور محمد.
هل كانت الرؤية واضحة عند أرنوفا كما هي الآن بعد 40 سنة أن تكون أرنوفا بهذا الحجم وهذه الكيفية؟
نعم، السؤال الأول الدكتور محمد هو هل كانت الرؤية واضحة منذ بداية إنشاء أرنوفا من ذاك الوقت أم أنها تطورت وتغيرت؟ والسؤال الثاني هل عدد الأعضاء الآن داخل أرنوفا هم 12,000؟ أي نعم. هل هذا بعد 40 سنة أو 43 سنة هل هذا العدد من الأعضاء كافي يحقق طموحكم؟ وإذا كان بالإمكان نتكلم عن نوعية الأعضاء، هل هم يعني منظمات أم أفراد أو كلام أو حكومات كذلك؟
So I think that on your first question, I think largely the vision was clear and has, for the long term, the basic vision, the underlying vision of strengthening the field through research is clear. And it was from the beginning. Of course, over time, the strategies change, right? So different boards may have different strategies. So for example, we just had an election a couple of years ago. Dr. Alan Abramson, who's this amazing scholar, Dr. Mary Sherhart, these are the new. And they have a very globalized vision. Not to say that Arnova wasn't international before, but they have a very specific agenda. So we have our strategic plan is on our website, but the strategic plan is very broad and very vague. And then the contents are defined by each elected board. So that's the question. But if you were to ask, David still comes to our conference, David Horton Smith. And he's very happy with the association. He's still very engaged, and so on. And usually, when an organization veers away from its basic mission or vision, you won't see that. But in Arnova, you will see the founders still there, and the new people that did not know anything about the history and the difficulties still there. And the second question, I wish we were 12,000, and I say that in jest. We have around 1,250, and your question of enough is a very good question, and it's a question I have raised with the Arnova board. And I tell you very specifically what my question to them is. 12,000 members means a lot of money, right? It means a lot of influence. The question I have for the board is, can we have the same level of quality and engagement and the effectiveness that we have with a number that size? So the question that I've asked for the board, and we're going through a strategic planning process now, is what is the ideal number? Maybe 500 is too small, but maybe 12,000 is too much. My view for arnova to do the kind of work we need to do, because to have the leading peer-reviewed journal, to having the conference, and those of you, Brother Musa, you came to the arnova conference. It's a very personalized relationship. You are able to make a lot of connections. If you're in a conference of 12,000, you won't be able to make those connections. My personal view is the conference should be around 1,000, between 700 and 1,000 is an ideal number, and membership number should be no more than 2,500. That's my view. Not to say we're going to turn people away, but I want the board to think in terms of this question. It's a very important question, and it goes to the very heart of our conference, of our organization. And far too often, associations in our field, and that's one of the areas that I study, they're all about numbers, right? But I think sometimes the right number can be different for each association. And I don't know if that answers your question. But it's 1,200, not 12,000.
أنا عندي سؤالين بالإضافة على إعادة سؤال أخوي بدر. كان في جانبين، جانب بخصوص التطوع وجانب آخر بخصوص الفريق التنفيذي نفسه وآلية إدارتهم للملفات المختلفة اللي ذكرها. ذكر 4 أو 5 أشخاص موجودين، إيش أدوارهم وإيش الأدوار الرئيسية اللي يقومون بها وكيف يدار هذا العمل لو بصورة عامة. السؤالين اللي عندي بالنسبة للمنظمة كما ذكر منظمة عضويات تعتمد على العضويات في عملها، وذكر عدة طرق يتم فيها إشراك الأعضاء في التوظيف، في اختيار البورد الخاص بالمنظمة. كيف ممكن أو تجربتهم في يعني كمنظمة كوميونيتي دريفن ممكن نعتبرها، كيف ممكن يساهمون في رسم استراتيجية المنظمة؟ جيد، تحتيج أولوياتها، هذا جانب. السؤال الثاني قياس أثر المنظمة كيف يشتغلون عليه كمنظمة بحثية.
جيد. أنا ودي بس قبل ما أقول سؤال عبد الله، الآن الأرنوفا هل لديهم نشاط غير نشاط كبير غير المجلة والمؤتمر؟ هل لديهم أنشطة أخرى؟
So we do things like the symposium and public.
This is my question actually. We didn't
sure.
reach yet.
Oh, okay. So we do a few things. First of all, we do the symposium and public policy and nonprofit. The idea is how can we impact public policy in our field by having a conversation amongst policymakers, researchers, and practitioners. And you can't have that in a big conference. So usually these are smaller convenings we do, 15 to 25 people. Very key, very so on. So that's one. We have a grant from the Ford Foundation right now to help develop civil society in Africa, through research. So we are incubating, it won't be an arnova, it'll be an Africa-based, Africa-governed, but we are simply providing its support. It's the Association for Research on Civil Society in Africa, AROCSA. So that's another one. The additional thing is I routinely look at so we have a group in Washington, D.C. of scholars that meet regularly to present research. It's a room like this big. But their research, not everybody can come to the meeting in D.C. So arnova has GoToMeeting, WebEx. So we provide support for those kinds of. So we provide smaller initiatives like that can somehow raise the research. So those are some of the projects we do.
سؤال أخوي عبد الله هو عن الجهاز التنفيذي، الفريق التنفيذي اللي في أرنوفا، ذكرت أنهم عندهم تقريبا 5. هل هم إيش أدوارهم يعني بالضبط، وهل لهم يعني دور في لهم دور في إيش يا عبد الله؟ اي نعم. كيف يستطيع ال5 أشخاص هذول يديرون؟ ما هي طبيعة أعمالهم وكيف يدارون وكيف ينفذون أعمالهم؟ يعني عدد صغير، منظمة كبيرة، أنشطة كثيرة، كيف يمكن لهذا العدد الصغير أن يدير الشيء هذا؟
So our executive committee, which are volunteers and members of the board, they don't do the work. Their role is, in our bylaws and our constitution, it says that, for example, if I need a budget adjustment, so let's say the Arnova board approved $1 million budget, of which 100,000 was for this purpose. Now I need 110,000. It's not going to change the underlying 1 million, but I have to take from here to here.
This is a question about the staff, not about
the staff. So, in our staff, just to give you a little bit of our structure, we have one. I'm the executive director. We have a membership coordinator. We have a coordinator for our website, communications, and media. And then we have a contractor that manages our conference, so does logistics for that. We have an assistant for me, and we have a programs assistant part-time. So this is our staff. And how we do our work, alhamdulillah, we use best practices in technology to make our work happen. So for example, one of the things that I believe in, and this is my management practice from before, I don't believe in custom-built solutions for managing associations. So there is something called, just one example, yourmembership.com, right? So there's a system that makes it easier for you to run an association and provides you a technology in one platform. Now, if I were to build yourmembership.com, it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for arnova. So basically, we use technology to really leverage our work. And I'll be honest with you, the amount of work we are able to achieve is quite a bit for the staff of our size. But my experience comes from the human services side in America, and human services in America have very little money. So we're able to make that happen. But subhanallah, I don't know if I answered your question properly.
There's another question. Ask you the two questions and answer them together. About measuring the impact of a research organization or association like arnova. This is the first one. The second one, as a community-driven organization, how you use the community to drive the vision of the organization.
Can you repeat your first one?
Measuring the impact.
Measuring the impact.
واضح عندكم السؤال يا شباب ولا مو واضح؟ اي واضح اذا. اي خلاص بسم الله. خلاص.
So the first one, how do we measure our impact? So we do it 3-4 ways. First of all, the fact is our journal is the #1 journal in the field, right? That is driven by the fact that we have our conferences. Our conferences drive the material that goes into our website. It's a different peer-reviewed process, but that's one measurement, right? It's the fact that we're the leading scholarly association in this field. The second is our numbers growth. So in Indianapolis, for example, where I met some of you guys for the first time, I think we were at 500 people. In Hartford, Connecticut, we went to 560. In Colorado, we went to 650. Last year, we were at 850, 860. So our numbers are going up. People are coming because we're doing something right. So that's the second thing. I'm going to give you, this is internal measurements, and I'll give you the external measurements, the attempts. Then the third thing that we look at is, of course, evaluations and so on. That's a piece. But this just shows that, and then, of course, the investments by foundations and nonprofits and so on, that legitimacy. Where I think we have not been able to measure the impact really well is once this research is produced, how do nonprofit organizations use it, right? And this is the challenge that we're dealing with in our association right now. We're having this conversation. We have something called pracademics in the organization. Practitioner academics become pracademics. And the idea is, how do you use research for practice? And how do you use practice for research? And we are having a conversation about how to do it really well. To do that better. This year, we started one small effort, and this is one of the things I was suggesting to you, that Kresge Foundation funds a project, I think it's in New York, where these are people that show how research can be, how when you do research in academia, when you do research in the United States, you're talking to other scholars. So I'm a scholar and I'm talking to another scholar, right? What they say is this group did a workshop at our Nova conference. They say you do the research one, which is the biggest part, right? Then how do you communicate this research to different audiences? You talk to scholars in one way. You talk to decision makers in a second way. You talk to the general public in a third way. You talk to media and so on. So we are going to start building those initiatives. But that's another thing. I will say this, that if you look at nonprofit Quarterly, for example, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, other journals, these are mainstream practice ones. They routinely quote our research in their work. So I don't know if that's, but the second part is a difficult one. That's something that we need to work on. Does that answer?
خلنا بس نروح لأبو محمد بعد. تفضل أبو محمد.
أنا عندي بس فقط إضافة. حقيقة كان إضافة لكلام الدكتور شاهد، اختبرنا مركز تنمية القيادات في الرياض. كان لقاء في ملتقى النوفا الأخير، لقاء مع النوفا للتعرف على يعني منظمة النوفا. بغض النظر عن ما دار جوا اللقاء، لكن حقيقة يعني أعجبني شيء لم أراه في أي مكان، أن يحضر الرئيس الحالي، رئيس مجلس الإدارة الحالي قدامك، ورئيس مجلس الإدارة السابق قدامك يشرح لك النوفا، ورئيس مجلس الإدارة القادم اللي بعد سنتين. هذا لم أشاهده في مكان قبل كذا خلال العام. فهذا يدل على يعني استكمال أو توضيح لحديث الدكتور حمد عبد القادر، كيف تتوارث الرؤية وتنتقل المنهجية من السابق للحالي إلى اللاحق. بس هذه مداخلة.
هو الأستاذ موسى ينقل تجربة رآها وأعجبته في أرنوفا، وهو أنه في أثناء التعريف بأرنوفا كان هناك رئيس مجلس الإدارة السابق والحالي والمستقبلي كذلك في مكان واحد، ويتكلمون عن أرنوفا بنفس اللغة وبنفس لغة الخطاب، وحضور الرئيس التنفيذي. طيب تفضل أخي الفاضل.
سؤال بس، المؤسسات البحثية معروف دائما تواجه يعني المراكز البحثية موضوع التمويل كعقبة، فدائما يعني يكون في بين المانح وبين المؤسسة البحثية دائما المانح يعني يبحث عن الأثر المرئي، فكيف هم يعرفوا يتخطوا هذه المشكلة يعني بحيث نقرب للمانح أن هناك أثر من هذه الأبحاث وهذه الدراسات.
طبعا الأخ من مداد وهو يعاني يعني يبث معاناة أن المراكز البحثية عادة ما تواجه مشكلة في الدعم، فهم كيف استطاعت أرنوفا وهي جهة بحثية تعتمد في التغيير على البحث والدراسات أنها تقنع المتبرع والداعم الذي يبحث عن أثر يعني مرئي، كيف استطاعت أن تتغلب على هذه العقبة من تجربتكم طيلة السنوات الماضية؟
So I think this is a global challenge, and I will give you first. I'll answer this of why it's important, an example of what happens if it doesn't, and then I'll talk a little bit about how arnova does. Have you heard of Lester Salomon at Johns Hopkins University? Have you heard of Paul Shervish at Boston College? Right, two of the biggest centers in research centers in this area. Paul Shervish's center closed down last year because Paul Shervish retired. It was all based on an individual, and it shut down. Lester Salomon, God bless him, he's continuing to work, but the question people ask is, what will happen to his center when he leaves? Now contrast that with three other examples that I will give you. One, the Center on Philanthropy, the Lilly School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. We don't know the individuals that are there. There was Dean Temple was there. Now you have Dean Pasek. There's, the names are not there, but the center is there, right? The second one is at University of Maryland in College Park, right? There's another center. The third center is RGK Center at the University of Texas. What are the differentiating? These are going to continue for perpetuity because they have OCOFs, right? I really believe that in order for our centers to do good work, and they have to do work over a long period of time, they have to have endowments. They have to have OCOFs, because this work is too valuable for it to be at the mercy of funding. This year, I'm interested in funding carpets. Tomorrow, I'm interested in lights. Research doesn't work that way. Research has to be independent. It has to go the way it needs to, because research is about the future. It's not about today. One of the challenges funders have to foundations all over the world have is they are looking at today's problems. So the way arnova worked and the way these centers worked is they started talking to funders that were thinking about tomorrow. That's one. You need visionary funders that are thinking about tomorrow. Second, that understand that it is unknowable what will happen tomorrow. Nobody knows what tomorrow brings. Researchers don't know it, funders don't know it, so they have to take the risk. And then the third aspect is that funders have to be able to trust the research funders to do the things in the future. So, and in our case, at Arnova, I wasn't part of this process, but our founders were able to find, one of them, the Lilly Endowment, the other one, the Mott Foundation. These are some dynamic foundations. If you want to look at some interesting foundations, what Mott Foundation is doing, Lilly Foundation is doing, Kresge Foundation is doing, Ford Foundation, these are pioneers within American philanthropy. They were visionaries, they trusted, they made sure they did their due diligence. Are these people trustworthy? Is this nonprofit transparent? Are they accountable? Do they have the right conversation? And then they talked with them and gave them the money. One other thing I'll tell you, this is something, I teach 2 classes. I teach nonprofit management and leadership and nonprofit boards and executive directors for University of Colorado and Andrews at the master's level. And I teach grant writing, fundraising, and development at University of Connecticut. And I tell all my students one thing. I say if you go to a funder and ask them for money, they will give you advice, most of the time. You go to a funder with good intention and ask them for advice. Many times they will give you good advice, which is very critical for our work, but they will then give you funding. The way to raise money is to engage in a partnership with a funder, reach out to them for advice, and because they have information we don't. Like when we were doing we're working on our Africa project, we don't get, the Africa project is funded by Ford, but I called Gates, I called Mott, I called Kresge, I said, do you have information? And then they gave me all these resources. I mean, if I would have had to pay for those resources, it would have cost millions of dollars. But they gave it to me for free, just on some conference calls and so on. So I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Thank you so much. أي إضافة أو سؤال يا إخوان؟ طيب الدكتور شارق ذكر أمس الحقيقة يعني تحرك رائع جدا لأرنوفا في الصين. والصين الآن تعيش حراك يعني في القطاع الخيري وفي القطاع الغير ربحي، حراك يعني متميز جدا. فلو ألقيت الضوء يا دكتور شارق وتكرمت على علاقة أرنوفا بالحراك البحثي داخل الصين، نكون لك من الشاكرين.
So last year I visited China two times, and this year I'll probably do a couple. And China is doing some amazing work, both on the philanthropic side in terms of giving, but even more importantly for our interest on the research side. There are at least 5 Chinese universities that are at one stage or the other of building either a school or institute or a center on philanthropy, all research-based. They have PhDs and master's students that are doing incredible theses, just because, it's a big country, and when China gets involved, they get engaged in an industrial level, and they're producing phenomenal research, both on the qualitative side and the quantitative side. And they're investing a great deal of money. So just to give you an example, every year Chinese institutions are bringing in the top researchers to China to sort of engage with their faculty. They're sending their students. We have a big component of Chinese students that come to Arnova every year to present research, be part of professional developments, and engage. This requires a lot of money and a lot of investment there, and they're doing that. One of the things that we're talking to right now, we're working with Ford, with Arnova for the Africa strategy. But in Asia, one of the conversations Chinese institutions are telling us is that, look, we are willing to help Arnova be impactful in Asia through investments in Chinese institutions. So we could host annual Arnova conferences in China, and these institutions would be really open, not just to help China, but they are thinking Asia-wide. So beyond the research, I'm also really impressed by their global vision. It's not just how can we take research and help China, it's how can China be a player in research to help the other parts of the developing world. And I was very impressed by that vision, and I'm very impressed by that strategy. It's a tremendous amount of both resources, funding, but I think honestly, and this is something, I've been in the nonprofit sector since 1996. I will tell you that many nonprofit managers put emphasis on money, on funding. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can't do much without funding. I would argue that the best nonprofits start with the ideas, right? Ideas come first, you develop it, the money will come. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to let a good idea go to waste. We have to have, and as Muslims, we know that. He promised us that. So we never worry about the money piece. Come up with the great ideas and so on. And I'm really impressed that the Chinese institutions, they're thinking about their strategy, not like as it, oh, this is happening, let's do it. They're really strategic in their thinking. They're employing some great resources and ideas and so on. So I was very, very impressed with that. In fact, one of my interns this year I hired an intern at arnova who is a Chinese student who's studying philanthropy at IUPUI. I did it specifically because I know that the China engagement is going to become very important at arnova, because their vision aligns with our vision of building the field through research.
هل ثمة أقوال أخرى لديكم يا إخوان؟ طيب أبو محمد تفضل، أبو صيبة عفوا. هو يقول الآن أنت هنا تتكلم عن الصين. ماذا لو كنت في الصين؟ بماذا سوف تتكلم عن تجربتك في السعودية؟
I will say very positive things. Actually, I will tell you, and I said this last night to the foundations. I believe that in the Muslim world, and I'm not saying this because I'm in Saudi Arabia, it's just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created our society, the Muslim Ummah society, and this is, now I'm putting on my Muslim hat on. I'm not arnova, I'm a Muslim activist and a believer in this work. There's a reason why Mecca is in Saudi Arabia, right? We have Hajj and Umrah. It is the center of the Muslim world, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed the Saudi community with oil and resources, but more than oil, the millions of people that come here, and they can be influenced by what they experience here. And prior to 9/11, I used to come to Saudi Arabia all the time because I used to work for Muslim American organizations, Islamic Society of North America, and I know the Saudi contribution to the development of Islam in America, Islam in Europe, Islam everywhere, right? So, and then after 9/11, things died down, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes does things for a reason, and Saudi philanthropy became concentrated in building waqfs, endowments, strategic philanthropy. And what I suggest now is that Saudi Arabia and Saudi foundations have to resume their role as a global player within the Muslim Ummah, and specifically in the field of research. There are politics in all other areas. In research, there's no politics. Help a student have a Muslim become a PhD in this field, help someone become a master's, help them publish, help Mudad journal. These kinds of things are critical, not just for Saudi Arabia. They're critical for the Muslim Ummah. And so what I would say is the conversations that I've had here yesterday, day before, and when Brother Musa came to in Chicago, is that Saudi Arabia has the potential. China is a player. Saudi Arabia has the potential to be a global player. It's a question of choice. So but very complimentary. I'm really amazed by the commitment to both philanthropy and, more importantly, research-centered philanthropy. That's something that is not happening everywhere in the world.
هل في أسئلة أو إضافة يا أخوان؟ في سؤال لكن طبعا هو ليس مادة تسويقية. يعني ماذا لو شورت يا دكتور شارق انه والله مركز مداد نحن سوف يعني نفكر اغلاقه، وانت اطلعت على جهد مركز مداد، هل ترى انها فكرة جيدة؟ كم نحتاج يعني مثل مركز مداد بالجهد اللي سمعته قبل قليل من الدكتور خالد يعني في اللقاء الخاص، ومدى أهمية مثل هذه المراكز البحثية التي يعني تكون أحيانا تغرد خارج السرب أو أحيانا يعني تعاني من أجل البقاء.
So, in all honesty, as you know, I did Umrah my first day here 2 days ago. Jazakallah khairan for This is one of the other privileges of coming to Saudi Arabia and having our meetings in Mecca. And I will honestly share you, and I shared this with you in our drive over. I made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for my forgiveness, for everybody and so on. And then I asked him for specific things. I asked that there would be a center like Mudad in every Muslim country in the Ummah. So Mudad Center is working in the Gulf, but we need Mudad Center every single place in the Muslim world. So I think it's the worst idea to not have centers like this. This is how the infrastructure of philanthropy in the United States and Europe has been built. When you look to the West for ideas and best practices, they would not have existed if Mudad-centered like organizations were not there. So you need that. And I'm not trying to say that because I'm here. We talked about this. This is my vision. In fact, in the United States, I'm starting a new center on American Muslim philanthropy. Even though we have centers on philanthropy, we need an American Muslim philanthropy center there because I believe in these kinds of centers. I made a dua that in every Muslim country in the world, there should be a chair in philanthropy at a university there. And the third thing I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is how can we increase the number of scholars that can engage from the Muslim community, that can engage with each other globally, not just Saudi Arabia, but globally, but also with the Western scholars. So this conversation is happening both ways. I think if there's one thing that we know now, and those of us in 20 years from now, we will find out whether or not something happens. 20 years from now, we should have the Muslim equivalent of arnova. We have to. It's an imperative. Because the world's problems, and especially our community's problems, are not going to go down. They're increasing. And we cannot solve the problem by putting a Band-Aid on the solution, and we cannot do it just by crying. We have to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made us ashraful makhluqat because we are thinkers, and we have to really do that. So I don't know if that's, but I think these centers are critical. And that's why, just to go back, one small thing. I came out of practice. So I did my master's in philanthropy, then I did a law degree. I have a JD. But I worked in nonprofit practice. I was working with homeless. I've worked with domestic violence victims, poor women. I worked with poor people whose children were taken away. And one of the things I realized after 10 years of working, that the children of my clients were now my new clients. So I put all my life and my effort in just trying to make the world a better place, and I was just putting a Band-Aid on the solution. That's why I came to arnova. I came to arnova because I think that if we're going to try to solve the problems and meet the challenges of today and tomorrow, it has to be through research.
Thank you so much. جزاك الله خير ما شاء الله. كنا بنخلص ها. تفضل دكتور.
أنا عندي سؤالين، السؤال الأول هل أرنوفا تغطي دائما في أبحاث جميع العمل الخيري في العالم ولا هي فقط تنتظر البحوث اللي تيجي لها؟ هل يفكرون في رؤيتهم إنه كل عام يسلطوا الضوء على مثلا دولة معينة للعمل الخيري فيها؟ يعني بحيث إنه كل سنة يكون في استضافة مثل ما يعمل أحيانا بعض المؤتمرات. النقطة الثالثة أبحاثهم هل تترجم الآن؟ هل عندهم رؤية أن يترجمونها بلغات أخرى كل سنة تطرح ترجع نستفيد من الآخرين، أما الاستفادة حقيقة من أبحاثهم بشكل كبير
الأسئلة اللي ذكرها الدكتور الفاضل هي يمكن لها علاقة بالمؤتمر أكثر من أرنوفا، وهذا يمكن يعجل بنا نحن ننتقل إلى المؤتمر أسرع إن تكرمت. أي الله يعطيك العافية. في شيء دكتور قبل ما ننتقل إلى
أرنوفا الآن بالجامعات قوية. كيف عندنا ممكن نجعل علاقة مركز مثل مداد بالجامعات؟
أي نعم. من الواضح أن هناك علاقة قوية بين أرنوفا والجامعات بشكل عام. كيف نستطيع أن نصنع علاقة متينة بين مركز بحثي مثل مركز مداد بالجامعات السعودية أو الخليجية؟
So the Center on Philanthropy, which is, one of the, I mention it because, of course, my PhD is from there. I'm a student of them, but they're the leading center of its kind in the world right now. And the way they built it was their funders, the Center on Philanthropy's funders, gave them the additional funding that they needed so that they would fund research at other universities. So all of a sudden, if you talk to any of the major centers in the United States, they receive some level of research. So I need a research on volunteerism. So they contracted this professor and so on. That's because because on the research side, funding is so important, but one way to lift up a center and make it more influential is for it to contract out research to other universities. And the Center on Philanthropy, to their credit, were very good. They could have just given all the money to Indiana University, right? In terms of every paper has to be from IU. But they wanted to build the field. They had a vision about beyond Indiana. They knew that they were just a tool for a purpose, and the broader purpose. And so they shared the wealth all across the scope. So that's one way to do it. That's the easiest way, and it's the least expensive way to do it.
وقت الصلاة حقيقة أزف الآن، ما بقي له تقريبا 4 دقائق. المقترح أن احنا نأجل النقاش عن تفاصيل اللقاء أو المؤتمر وكيف إدارته وكيف تنظيمه إلى بعد الصلاة. ناخذ بريك الآن مدة تقريبا 3 ساعة صلاة، وأيضا في بعض الأكلات الخفيفة بالخلف، ونرجع إن شاء الله على الساعة 1 بالضبط. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. حياكم الله أيها الأحبة. في الفترة الثانية، في الفترة الأولى تكلم الدكتور شارق عن يعني الأرنوفا بشكل عام كمنظمة. في هذا الجزء من اللقاء الجميل سوف يتكلم الدكتور شارق عن كيف تنظم مثل هذه المناسبة الكبيرة الذي يحضرها آلاف وتقدم فيها مئات الأبحاث والدراسات. وأيضا لا يكتفى فقط بالمؤتمر نفسه، بل هناك عدة أنشطة مصاحبة للمؤتمر. سوف نتوقف إن شاء الله بعد ساعة من الآن، وناخذ يعني نتوقف إلى البريك لمدة تقريبا 10 دقائق، ثم نستأنف الفترة الثالثة والأخيرة، وننهي بعد ذلك في الوقت المحدد بمشيئة الله عز وجل. إذا كان بالإمكان دكتور شارق نتكلم يعني بشيء من التفصيل عن يعني ما هي الضوابط العامة للمؤتمر، ما هي كيف تصمم وتعمل اللجنة العلمية الموجودة داخل المؤتمر، ما هي الغايات، كيف تحدد الغايات الأساسية والعامة عن المؤتمر أرنوفا، وكيف ينظم هذا المؤتمر، ما هي الأنشطة وكيف تنظم الأنشطة المصاحبة كذلك للمؤتمر، وهناك عدة أيضا كيف يدعم هذا ويحصل الدعم، وكيف يقاس أو تقاس عوائد الأثر أو الأثر الذي المنشود من مثل هذه المناسبة العالمية السنوية. فتفضل مشكورا.
Assalamu alaikum. So just some general remarks about the conference that I think we all know, but I think it's always bear repeating, which is the most important part of a successful conference is planning, 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 planning. And we all know this because we all plan conferences. But just to give you an idea of how much planning we put into arnova, right now, 2 years ago, I signed contract from 2016, 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. The next 7 years of conferences are already set on which cities. I have the contracts with the hotels already set. I have the local arrangements committees in each of those cities already set. And I, in fact, travel every year to those 7 cities. Every year, it's part of my work. So once a year, I go at least to all this, the places that we're going to have a future conference. Now, of course, for next year's conference and the year after, so this year's Washington, D.C., next year's Grand Rapids, I go more often because there's a lot more planning. But just to give you the idea, we are planning it to 2022, and inshallah by this summer I will have also signed contract for 2023. So long-term visioning, it does 2-3 things. One, it tells the audience this conference is not going anywhere. Although we've been around for 40-odd years, people know that. But this assures everybody. It allows conference attendees to plan ahead. They know that if they're, especially our international attendees, if they're thinking about coming to the US and it aligns with their things, a lot of people can plan ahead and make sure that that happens. So for example, this year in Washington, D.C., we have quite a few people coming from Africa that normally don't come, but it aligns with their research and their work in Washington, D.C., and so they were able to plan years and ahead to make that happen. So just as a general point of view that we do this. Probably the most important aspect after planning to make a conference success is the content. And I'll talk about how we develop our content and so on. But first I'll go into a general overview of what arnova conference consists of. Arnova has 3 days of central programming that are primary. This is the official conference events. And it consists of 4 or 5 different types of events. One, if I'm an individual researcher and I want to present my research, I submit it and it go through the review process, and I'll talk about that. And then if my paper is accepted, the conference organizers finds other papers like mine and we put them into them. So these are individual research papers, so that's one. This is where the individual's only planning is sending in their research, their paper. The second is called panels. Panels, and this is one of the things I tell the international visitors, and especially groups that are interested, that aren't doing sort of much more intensive university-based research, is panels are where I decide a theme. So for example, last year I developed a panel on Muslim philanthropy in crisis. Then I reached out to 2-3 other scholars and I said, can you write on this? Can you write this and this? And then we collectively put together. So the 4 papers in my panel and the chair was selected by the organizers. So that's panel. So in that case, the full hour and a half is designed by the group of people that are putting it together. And panels are great places where you could have a panel on Saudi philanthropy, for example. And then you could have one on foundations, you could have one on endowments, you could have one on capacity building and so on. So this is how you can do that. The third one, so these 2 require research papers. You have to submit abstracts with some ideas, and then before the conference you have to submit papers. So these are research papers. But there are some ideas that are still in the infancy, or some that require broader conversation, and they're not research-based, and we call them colloquiums. So a colloquium has to have an abstract, has to have an idea, but does not have to have firm research behind it. And that's another way in which Saudi Arabia, Arab, Muslim, African, other places can propose colloquium. And in that case, it's a panel that consists of 3 or 4 people. They'll come in, they'll talk about specific ideas. It's a specific theme around that. But the key emphasis is there's no paper involved with that. The fourth thing that you can do is, and this is very good for graduate students, it's very good for NGOs, and it is very good, even senior scholars use it, it's the poster sessions. And this is when an idea is not a full paper yet. Maybe it is the beginning of a research, you're about to put together a survey, or you have initial findings from a survey. So not a full paper, but this is a poster, and we have these big posters where you present all your research on a poster, and so that's a fourth one. Now, of these 4 things, 3 of them are distinct on their selection criteria. So the 3, the poster, the paper, and the panel, are selected through a process called peer review. And basically what happens is the Arnova, and I just got an email from our co-chairs, the Arnova board appoints 2 of its board members, 2 of the 15, to be the conference co-chairs. Then they go out and recruit specialists in different areas to become the track chairs. So we have, if you notice, we distributed a call for paper. There's a general theme for the conference. There are specific tracks. And then you can submit even, if you have a topic that doesn't fit here, doesn't fit there, you can still put that in. So the conference co-chairs then select track chairs. These are scholars within the field that are specialists in those areas. Now, when they get your papers and your panels and so on, it is blind. So they don't know who proposed it. There are only 3 people that can see all the information, me and the 2 conference co-chairs. And so then the selectors, the people that review the content, your papers, your panels, they don't know who proposed it. They don't know where it came from. They look at it, they basically judge it by merit. And it's not one person. Usually it's 3 different people that independently do the review, and they give a point system. And if it's a 5 and a 4, your paper is accepted. If it's a 3, we give you the option not of a paper, but to go become a poster. And if it's a 2 and a 1, we reject it with comments. We provide comments that these are things that we're missing. Next year, propose it by fixing these issues. But the key thing about this is for the integrity of the peer, and this is within American academics and Europe, the blind peer review is a very important process. Everything that is published in our journal is blind. It's peer reviewed by 2 to 3 different people that don't even see each other's comments. So it's not that Brother Ibrahim and I are on the peer review process. We talk about which paper. He does his peer review, I do my peer review, we do it blind. And then in of course, the selection process, we share our information at the end. But when we're doing the review, the idea is we want to have each person selecting the content to be independent, to be as unbiased as possible. Now, of course, some scholars, like if there's a research on American Muslim philanthropy, it's likely 3 people. So it's me, Sabit, or one other person, right? So sometimes it's very obvious. But in most cases, we receive 8, 6, 7, 500 of papers are accepted. We probably get 600. We have an 80% approval rate. But, it's a lot of papers. A lot of people submit. And so peer review is one way that we do that. So that goes into the selection process. But the conference doesn't start there. It starts before. The year before the conference, so that this year's theme, we submitted, gave you guys all of that. That was selected last year by there's a conference call between the president, the executive director, the conference co-chairs, and we come up with a broad theme. We say, let's talk about these kinds of things. Then there's a conference planning committee. This is an independent group of people, our members. They then come up and they select a theme. The theme is then approved by the president of arnova. So that is the broad theme, so the public policy and so on. Then the conference committee comes up with the broad topics. And then there, on the other side, on the second page, you have track chairs. This is based on experience we have seen. We get policy and governance, for example. We get articles in law. We get articles in philanthropy, on fundraising. So based on that, we have created tracks so that those people that do research in a specific area, they can identify other scholars, and you can, because it's Brother Musa was there. There's so many sessions last year. It's hard to choose. So if you have a track, then at least you can identify, I'm interested in governance, I'm interested in fundraising, I'm interested in philanthropy, I'm interested in policy. And you'll see on the second page, there's the tracks. And so they are organized in that way. So that's how most of the conference is put together. Now there are some exceptions to this. Then the conference co-chairs, the executive director, the president, we look at the program and we see what are missing. What are new research ideas? What are issues? People will present papers and paper based on current research, but we have to think about tomorrow. We have to think about 5 years. So we have brainstorming sessions, and we create sessions ourselves of what's missing in the agenda. So last year we started a new innovation, and if you remember, we had the mini plenaries. We had 5 sessions that were, during those 5 times, all other times we have between 20 to 24 parallel sessions. 24 rooms where something is going on. During that time slot, there are only 5 sessions going on, and we decide what those 5 are. So that's one way that so we are forcing everybody to think about future areas of research or missing areas of research or critical issues in research. So last year we talked about data. Data is a big problem. If you're a researcher and if you don't have data, how are you going to write a paper? So how can you create access to data? What are the sources of data? Not everybody knows. So we thought about doing something like that. Nonprofit finance was another one. The history of philanthropy. We are so actively thinking about the future, we forget about the past. And the past informs the present and the future. So we do the mini plenaries. Beyond that, we have an opening and closing plenary. The opening and closing plenary has some distinct things, and this is changing, so I will give you different models that are happening. In the past, we have a conference planning committee, which is appointed by the Arnova board, and this is international. Then we have a local arrangements committee, a committee from the host city. These are the people that help us get the sponsorship money from the local communities, because when we go to a city, cities bid. So when we are going to Washington, D.C., 10 universities came together, said, we will give you this much money, bring the conference to Washington, D.C. So we tie our location with sponsorship money. So we have local sponsors. They get us volunteers. We need around 100 volunteers just during the conference to manage this. They help us with that. The one other thing that we ask them to do is we ask them, can you identify local people that are doing some innovative things in practice, policy, or research that have international implications? So if we're in Washington, like Washington, D.C. is not a good example because D.C. is generally everything is global, right? But when we were in Colorado or when we were in Chicago, there are things happening in Chicago or there are things that are happening in Denver that have national importance. In Colorado, the issue was community service and government, so we brought the AmeriCorps people, but the AmeriCorps people national and the AmeriCorps people Colorado came together and they talked about. So you want to bring some local flavor into the conference, but it has to be someone. So if you're coming from Saudi Arabia, you want to get something out of it. So the local arrangements committee, it provides a consulting role in that. And then we have the closing, and then the opening plenary is usually decided by the conference co-chairs, the Arnova president, and the executive director. We have a discussion about what's missing, what's thinking. Usually our surveys, our evaluation has some ideas. In the future, you should do this, then the other, and we bring it together. But we define the vision. And so this year, we're starting planning towards next year. So we have the opening plenary, we have the closing plenary. This year, last year, the opening plenary was Dr. Bert Weisbrod. It was the 40th anniversary of his paper. So we thought, and he was an amazing, he gave a very scholarly presentation about his perspective of how the field has come in 40 years and what he thinks are the challenges. The closing plenary was on accountability. This issue of accountability is really important. And last year, one of the speakers actually came to the United States, to Saudi Arabia to speak. He is the CEO of GuideStar. So he came. I think the current one, because right after that, he was telling me that next week or the week after, he was coming to Saudi Arabia for a conference. And some of the other people that you guys met, it was in the past? So he was there, we had a scholar, and Al-Nur Ibrahim. If you're interested in accountability, the leading scholar in this field is Dr. Al-Nur Ibrahim. He's at Harvard University at the Hauser Center, and so he was the one. And so it was a panel, but the whole the whole conference attended. So that's an example of how we do. So we have the opening and closing, we have the mini plenaries, and then we have these posters, panels, papers, and colloquiums. But that's not enough. Then during the conference, we also think about professional development, capacity building of scholars, of practice, and others, and we add that to the mix. We also add other things. So, for example, this year we added experiential things. Not me, but let's say there's someone who is now retiring. Are you done with the field, or what's your thought? So we brought 3 or 4 members of ours who are retired but are still very active. And we talked about, how do you think about this? How do you think about your investment and what about mid-career, early career, pre-career? So those kinds of reflective kinds of things. So not just research, but also bringing these important stories forward. So did that. In addition to that, prior to the conference starting, we have something called pre-conference workshops. Pre-conference workshops are divided into 3 categories. pre-conference workshop number 1 are award-based. So we have, arnova has specific programs. One is called the Diversity Fellowship. It's for people that are from African American, from Latino, from minorities that are in the field. In academia, this is a minority. And we create a professional development workshop. We give them free conference attendance so that they're coming. We want to add to the diversity of the conference. We provide them a small stipend, $250, to help pay for that one night of hotel. And we provide them one day long worth of, it has lunch and dinner, but full day of senior scholars coming in and giving them professional development tips to make them successful in their career. So that's one. The second thing we do is, for those of our members that are PhD students and have defended their proposal, so they've written the proposal and they've defended the proposal. And I'm not sure if in the Saudi context it's different. So they've defended the proposal, and so they apply for the doctoral fellowship program. And what happens is we select 10 students, we pay them $650, I think it is, free registration. They come, and the full day, they present their research to 3 senior scholars and the rest, and they get advice. How do you make your proposal better? And we had this year, we went from 10 to 20, so we doubled the program. So we had 20 students. In the diversity, we have 24. In this, we have 20. Next year, this year, I keep thinking next year, but we're in 2016. In Washington, D.C., I'm adding a new one. If you are a PhD student, you have passed your comprehensive exams, but you have not defended your proposal. You're trying to think what proposal I should have. We're creating a special program for them. So that's 10 more. For next year, that I think this year, that's something important for Saudi young students. We are trying to create a professional development diversity workshop for students that are PhD students but not from North America. So Asia, Africa, Latin America. This is our focus. So if you're scholars and you want to get your, so in that case, we'll waive there's no money attached to it, but we give free conference scholarships. So the conference is free for them. So if they're Saudi institutions, for example, and I said the same thing in Africa, I said the same thing in China, if you want to send, we'll be having a day-long professional development workshop on how do you publish? How do you successfully get into NVSQ? And we'll have the editors of NVSQ, NML, Nonprofit Management Leadership, Nonprofit Policy Forum, and others that will be there to help with how do you take your research and put it into these Western forums. And we're going to have 20 of those. So these are pre-conference. But that doesn't end there. Now, in addition to that, we also have our sections. Arnova has sections. So you have members, 1,250 members. But not everybody's interested in everything. Some are teaching. Some are interested in how do you teach philanthropy, nonprofit management really well. Some are interested in social enterprise and entrepreneurship. Some are interested in theory, interest, boundaries, and so on. Some are interested in others. So we have 8 sections that are on our website. And so each section can do a pre-conference workshop. Our local arrangements committee can do a pre-conference workshop. Then we do a workshop on research methods. So last year we brought Danielle Varda, who's from University of Colorado. She did a 3-4 hour long workshop. Actually got canceled, so now we're doing it online because her flights were canceled into Chicago. But research methods is important. We do a workshop on teaching. So the Hubert Humphrey Project comes in, they did a workshop on teaching. So we have these. And we think of others because it's pre-conference. And all of these are free. You don't have to be registered to the conference to attend our pre-conference workshops. So so our sections and so on do that. And beyond that, people are constantly writing to me. So for example, one of the things I would love to do is to do a pre-conference workshop of Muslim NGOs. So they come together, we'll provide the space, hopefully get some programming together. We did some pre-conference workshops for the Saudi delegation. So we do specifics like that too. And that's another one. So this is pre-conference workshops. Now, and these are not peer-reviewed. They're not blind reviewed. These are very purposeful. People propose, we review it. As long as it's within our purview, we let them. And so we have pre-conference workshops. In addition to that, we have something called the Early Scholars Professional Development Workshop. It's also free. Anybody can go to these. And these are different workshops on how do we get young scholars who are in master's or PhD or assistant professor level to succeed in their career. And so we have multiple workshops like that. So that's the other piece that we do. Then in addition to that, so and if I'm going too much and too fast, so now in addition to that, we also want to create opportunities for networking at our Nova conference. So we do 2 or 3 things to make that happen. First, and some of our Saudi brothers know that this, when you come to our conference, there are ribbons. You know, if you're not everybody's a speaker, so we don't give a speaker. But you know, if you're a board member, you get one. If you're executive director, you get one. If you are a first-time attendee to our conference, we give you a sticker that says ribbon that says new first-time attendee. Our members know if you see that ribbon, you have to go and talk to that person, create connections. So first-time attendees is one, right? This year, one of our sections, TIBS, they did something, they created a TIBS section. So they put the TIBS section so that if anybody was interested in that area, now they know it's identified. So, and of course you can have many ribbons, but you know, so we try to keep it. But the idea is, one way is, how do you identify first-time attendees? So that's one. The second thing that we do is our sections have events. Anybody can have them there in the evenings after. So our conference goes starts at 8:15, goes to around 5:30. In the evening, there are section meetings, and you can go to them. You can attend these meetings, and you can connect with people in social entrepreneurship, governance, whatever your area is. And so these are smaller meetings, start as little as 10, as many as 50, 60 people. We also, sections are much more formal. They have a governance structure. You have to pay to be a member. We have something also called common interest group. So let's say a bunch of you decide that, you know, you have to have at least 5 people to create a section. You have 50 members. To create a common interest group, it requires 5. If 5 of you come together and say, you know what, we want to meet around this area, then on Friday night we provide space for that. Now, in addition to that, we also have, we changed our structure a little bit. So this year, you may have noticed on Thursday, those of you you attend the conference in Colorado. So this year, one of the things we changed was on Thursday and on Saturday during the lunches is when we used to have our plenary sessions, right? We didn't have that this year. During Thursday lunch and Saturday lunch, no speeches. So we made the plenary speeches outside of the meals. So our lunches then became a place where people could connect and so on. One year we tried an experiment. It worked. We go back and forth. Where what we do is we actually, in the room, like 20 of the tables out of the 50, 60 tables, we put topics. So if you're interested in Chinese philanthropy, this table. And so that allows. So that's another piece that we do to network. In addition to that, we have on Thursday night, one of our sponsors, Baruch College, they do it, they pay for it, they do everything. They have a reception where anybody can come in, there's hors d'oeuvres, they have drinks and stuff like that, and you come in, you meet, and so on, and that's. On Friday night, we always have a reception on Friday night, and that's Arnova covers that. People come together. It's not as good food as the Baruch one. Baruch spends more money. I'm much cheaper. Financial sustainability. I cut the budget of the, but I added coffee. But we have a Friday night reception, and that's another piece. Of course. Yep, absolutely. And then one last piece, and then I'll add it, is we have a exhibit hall. And what I did was, exhibit hall is where all the NGOs, universities, and presses, they have their stalls there. I made sure that we have coffee breaks, one in the morning, one in lunch every day, in the afternoon, and they're always there. So everybody comes for coffee, they're around, and so those are 5 opportunities in addition around coffee and tea that people can network. So I'll take a stop. And
إذا كان في أي سؤال أو إضافة أو استفسار بس عشان يعني راح نكمل إن شاء الله يعني بعد ما ننتهي من الأسئلة. تفضل. طبعا أحيانا إشكالية الترجمة ما تدري سمعت الكلام في سياق. مي بإشكالية، لا اسأل أي حتى لو ما كان. أي بالضبط.
أسأل عن هل في شريحة محددة بالضبط المستهدفة من المؤتمر؟
نعم، الأستاذ عبد الرحمن يسأل هل هناك شريحة محددة يعني مستهدفة من المؤتمر؟
The specific target group for Arnova's conferences are people that are interested in research related to our nonprofit philanthropy and civil society. The reason why we're distinct in one way is you don't have to be a university professor to be at Arnova. You could be an NGO worker, you could be a civil society, you could be a policy. But the purpose of Arnova is research. So we don't do fundraising workshops, we don't do trainings on management and so on. That's not the purpose. The purpose is how to on research, sharing research, discussing research, making research better, so that the next step is to take research and convert into practice. One thing I also wanted to thank the Leadership Development Center. Last year, they brought a delegation to Arnova, and I keep talking about the delegation, but actually it was through the efforts of Leadership Development Center, Brother Ahmed Al Hussein on your staff, and this delegation was amazing. I mean, on the evaluations, people sent me saying we were so impressed. The two delegations, one was the Saudi delegation, one was the African delegation. Really interested in wanting to meet, network, connect. Everybody I know had met the Saudi delegation. So I really appreciated Leadership Development Center's leadership in bringing this delegation to Saudi Arabia. I know Mudad was involved, but I know you guys had really taken the leadership. So Jazakallah khairan. Thank you.
احنا في المقابل نشكرهم الحقيقة، يعني جزء كبير من نجاح تجربة الزيارة في العام الماضي اللي نظمها مركز خدمة القيادات برعاية مؤسسة سليمان راجحي، اللي هو عدة نقاط إيجابية الحقيقة تسجل وتحسب للدكتور شارق والمنظمة عموما.
ممتاز.
يمكن أسردها بشكل سريع. يعني أول شيء التواصل فعال، يعني عندهم تواصل جدا عالي وفعال أثناء عملية الترتيب والتحضير المؤتمر قبل شهر ونص أو شهرين. الأمر الثاني يعني كان عندهم مرونة في تقديم الخدمات ويعني التفاوض عليها. أضف هذه الخدمة أحدث هذه الخدمة، يعني كانوا مرنين جدا وهذه ميزة تحسب لهم. الاهتمام أبدوا اهتمام كبير بالوفد الحقيقة. يعني طلبنا يعني مدة المؤتمر 3 أيام، لكن الزيارة كانت كلها 10 أيام. يعني طلبنا زيارة المؤسسات المانحة والمؤسسات الخيرية والمراكز البحثية والتقاء بالشخصيات على هامش المؤتمر، وهذه لا تقل أهمية عن المؤتمر نفسه. ربما الزملاء اللي شاركوا في الوفد قابلوا يعني عدد كبير من الشخصيات المتخصصة في عدة مجالات، وهذا يدل على أنهم يتمتعون بعلاقات كبيرة وقوية داخل المنظمة. أيضا لفت نظرنا القضية اللي أشار لها أبو محمد، وهي التعاقب الوظيفي. في واحدة من الجلسات يعني فعلا كان في المدير التنفيذي الحالي والمدير التنفيذي السابق والمدير التنفيذي المستقبلي، وهذه يعني ميزة لفتت نظري.
الله يعطيك العافية. الأستاذ عبد الرحمن أيضا يشكركم على إنجاح مثل هذه الرحلة السابقة، والوفد الذي يعني حقق شيئا من الإنجازات أو كثيرا من الإنجازات، ويعني يعود الفضل بعد الله عز وجل لك الدكتور شارق. وهناك يعني عدة نقاط أثارت اهتمام الأستاذ عبد الرحمن والفريق العامل معه، وهي قضية مثل التواصل الجيد يعني والمرونة في تقديم الخدمات للوفد، وبالإضافة إلى الاهتمام الشامل. وأيضا يعني لفت انتباههم التعاقب الوظيفي، فهم اطلعوا على يعني وجود المدير التنفيذي السابق والحالي والقادم في مكان واحد ويتبادلون الأدوار. يعطيك العافية دكتور الأستاذ عبد الرحمن. تفضل أخي بدر.
السؤال خصوصا طبيعة المنظمة الكونية منظمة تخصصية في مجال سكولر، يستطيع هم يحددوا بالضبط ايش الثيم، يحددوا ايش العناصر، ويستطيعوا يقيموا ايش اللي يركب سوا وايش اللي ما يركب سوا. طيب طبيعي لو كذا جينا نستغرق كذا، هو سؤال خاص بالقطاع عندنا. يعني طبيعة المؤسسات اللي عادة تقوم بهذه مؤسسات بسيطة لا تمتلك الخبرة، فمن خلال خبرته كيف تستطيع المؤسسات البسيطة هذه تبدأ تخش في الجانب هذا وتفيد، وكيف تستطيع تختار ناس تساعدهم على أي أساس يختاروهم.
جميل.
يعني يدينا رؤيته في شيء.
ممتاز. الأستاذ بدر يتكلم عن تحدي الحقيقة تعيشها السعودية، وهي أن في قلة من الباحثين والدارسين والمنظمات المهتمة بالبحث العلمي فتلجأ كثير من المؤسسات المانحة والجهات التي تريد أن تصمم بعض البرامج المناسبات البحثية إلى ما يسمى بالجهات الوسيطة المقاولون. فلو يعني تعطينا كذا بعض النصائح والتوجيهات كيف تستطيع هذه الجهات الوسيطة أن تستقطب الناس المتميزين، ويعني عملية الاختيار وعملية تجميع المواضيع مع بعضها البعض في مجموعات وما إلى ذلك.
I think we went through this in the American and the European context for sure, and now the Chinese context is happening. The best way to do that is it's going to take some time before you have a school of philanthropy in Saudi Arabia, right? You have to have scholars that are going to become part of that. So the best way to do it is to put together scholarly interdisciplinary workshops where you identify people in different faculties that are out there to introduce them how to do the research, right? People are scholars, at least I know in the United States, and I'm sure it's no different in Saudi Arabia, scholars are just really busy. And if you're going to try to get onto their agenda, you have to make things easier for them. So, for example, corporate social responsibility is one, social entrepreneurship is one. So business schools would be interested in this, and if you could do some sort of an interdisciplinary workshop where you do these. So the idea behind these conferences is you bring selected, they're not presenting papers, but you're actually bringing them in a small room, 5, 10, 15, 20 scholars, and you're putting together these kinds of conversations. The advantage is there are two ways to create scholarships, right? One is to create new masters and PhD students and so on. Well, that's going to take time. Most PhDs take 5, 7, 10 years. So you do that. You make the investment like we are in young doctoral programs, like we are. That's why we're doing the early scholars development program and so on. Build these early scholars development. This is about the future. The way we build the current research is things like when we do the symposium in public policy and nonprofit. Many of the people that come to our symposiums, 12, 15, 20, 25 people, they're not arnova members. But we have found people that we think would be interested and bring them into the room and have a conversation. So you work on building the early future scholars through the professional development workshops. But then you have very targeted, specific conversations by bringing existing scholars and convincing them that there are aspects to their research that speak to us, right? So if you're doing public policy research and government research, now in Saudi Arabia, in China, this is an issue. In US, it was an issue. And I know in Saudi Arabia, with the specific strategy of keeping oil prices low, we talked about it. Now government is going to contract with nonprofits, right? Well, there's some great research out of the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C. that talks about government contracting. Well, you bring one of the leading scholars there, and then you reached out to public administration schools and government policy school and say, look, we have this scholar. And suddenly you ignite interest in this new area of research. The advantage of this research is the path is already laid in Western and Eastern context, context. The local people have to really just think about the Saudi context and sort of use that methodology towards it. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it's helped, but there are another part of the question regarding the intermediary. When the intermediary asked to launch this conference in a specific topic or some area, sometimes they face difficulty to decide which kind of theme that they want to choose, which kind of speaker, which kind of keynote speak or panel discussion. What's the criteria that they can, especially when they go on targeting the speaker, because especially when you don't have a lot of people who participate and come and send paper for that. So any just help or steps that maybe help them to do such things?
I think that's why there's two questions that any intermediate, especially funders that come to you and say, do a conference on this. I would recommend you do two things. Ask. One, it should be a long-term commitment, 5, 10 years. We're going to do this workshop, this symposium, this thing over 5 or 10 years. Because in 1 year, you can't do all the themes. So ask for that commitment for a 5, 10 years of funding and doing that. The second thing is, once you have that 5-year, 10-year commitment, then convene. So to give you an idea of what we did, when we started our symposium in public policy and nonprofits, this year we will do our 5th. When the first year what we did was we brought scholars and said, okay, what are the topics? What are the themes? What are the ideas? And they became part of helping us define what was they gave us names of keynotes. Now we basically put that, identified, we published a report that this is our vision, and now we're working on that strategy. But Mott Foundation and Kresge have a long-term commitment to this idea. So that's one way, is this thing, bringing the groups of people together, identifying the themes, and then coming up with a long-term, and then over 5-10 years you're doing that. That's one. The second thing is, and this is, I think, a much more beneficial approach because it essentially largely brings Saudi scholars together to really talk about these issues. But if you feel that, no, that's a much more longer process, the second piece would be to bring 3 or 4 leading American scholars or European scholars or whatever, have them be in the conversation, and start with them presenting about all the broad themes within the different research agenda. Have them talk about the scope of research agendas in the West, right? And then from those topics, then have a conversation with the Saudi scholars to say, okay, which one of these are relevant to us? And also, what's missing? Sometimes it's really much easier to be critical of something once it's once it's presented. So that's a way to jumpstart it. The other advantage of something like that, especially if you brought someone like Alan Abramson, who some of you met, he's our current president. He's an expert on policy, government contracting, and so on. You brought Jeff Brudney, who is the editor of our journal, but he's one of the leading scholars in the world on volunteerism, right? Pro bono volunteer. So you bring these 4 or 5 people that are multidisciplinary, and they can come up with a very range of topics that's out there. And then you guys would add to that or reduce that. Is that helpful?
دكتور أسئلة كذا رحلناها
بغير سؤالي بس.
لك الحق تفضل.
يعني جاوب على شيء. أنا أتكلم عن آثار المحتوى والملتقى هذا على المنظمات العالمية، الأمم المتحدة، لجانها اللي تعمل في العمل الاجتماعي. هل هناك في فعلا نتائج هذه المؤتمرات لها أثر على هؤلاء؟ مثلا ملتقى دافوس اللي يرسل فيه السياسات الآن العالم كله، هل لهم مشاركة فيه؟ يعني هل هناك أثر لهذه البحوث في المنظمات التي تدير العالم الآن، ولا مجرد بحوث تبقى وآثارها محدودة؟ أو هل كذلك أثر على الدول، أحيانا ترسل الدول مثلا قد يكون البحث مرتبط بدولة معينة أو هذا الارتباط
جيد. هو يسأل الدكتور الفاضل عن يعني هل هناك أثر على للمؤتمر بشكل عام أو الأبحاث التي تلقى على يعني المنظمات العالمية، على الحكومات، على ثم يعني سؤال هل يستهدف المؤتمر أصلا هو التأثير على مثل هذه المنظمات العالمية؟ أين دائرة التأثير في عمل أرنوفا بالتحديد، إذا كان هناك دوائر محددة من قبلكم؟
So in the past, we have not had target areas, and that's one of the things that, when I was brought on, I told you I'm an expert in my work on nonprofit turnarounds. And not that Arnova needed turnaround, it's a major brand, it's an internationally known organization, but it had some management type issues and so on. And one of the things I was coming in was to fix certain things. So I came in and brought in a new electronic database and management system and so on, and steps like that. One of the things that we want to do is right now, alhamdulillah, we are getting these members and so on without doing any outreach. So we now are moving towards, we're going through a strategic planning process to really thinking about, one, how to attract more people from outside of the United States and Europe and Australia. We get Australia, Europe, and so on. And actually we get a lot of people from Asia, from China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan, and so on. So we're looking at where are we not getting people, and then what is going to be our strategy to bring them in. One of the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing here by virtue of adding on, I've been traveling for 3 weeks already through Africa because of our Ford project. But the reason why I came here was it was an opportunity to sort of, by me being here, hopefully bringing more people to the table at Arnova. So
is it from your strategy to targeting a certain group or certain governments or policies, and you measure the impact of this targeting, or you are just like academic research?
We are a platform. So we provide the platform, and we provide then any idea that meets the peer review process can be presented here, discussed here, shared here, and hopefully made better and so on. Some ideas come and presented and they never get published. Some ideas come here and they become papers, they become books and so on. We provide just a platform. Arnova's job is to provide the platform. The only difference that we're doing is, one of the concerns we have, specifically because a big chunk of our membership is American, is we are concerned that American and state and local policy in the, related to nonprofits isn't always research-based. So what we are trying to do now is, how do we train our members and how do we train government to have a conversation so that when government is about to enact a policy that's going to do something, sometimes they don't even know which researchers are the experts in this field, right? Because we're all in silos, practice, research, policy, we're all in our different worlds. So by helping them realize who are the scholars in the field, what is the research, and then hopefully when they think about their government policy, it's based on that. So that's probably one of the few areas where we've become much more sort of involved.
هم عبارة عن منصة لتجميع يعني الدراسات والأبحاث، وعندهم رؤية أنهم يجمعون يعني الثلاث أطراف الأساسية اللي يعملون في جزر يعني منفصلة عن بعض، اللي هي الساسة والباحثين والممارسين. يعني هم في النهاية هم عبارة عن منصة. إجابة على سؤال الدكتور، ما عندهم بعد استراتيجي لاستهداف ناس معينين والتأثير عليهم. تفضل أخي الفاضل.
أولا يعني أرحب بالدكتور في بلاد الحبيبة في السعودية. وسؤالي دكتور شارع بصفته شخصية مسلمة ويعني يعتلي أرنوفا، هل لهذه الشخصية تأثير على المؤسسة أو سواء يعني في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية؟ وكذلك هذه الخبرة السنوات في عقد المؤتمرات وعمل الخيري، هل لها تأثير على العمل الخيري الإسلامي كشخصية؟
جيد. هذا يمكن ثاني مرة يسأل الدكتور عن نفس هو أولا يرحب بك، يعني جميل الترحيب وأهلا بك في السعودية كشخصية مسلمة وناشطة في العمل الخيري. هل الشخصية المسلمة يعني المتمثلة في السؤال الآن متمثلة فيك أنت دكتور شارق على يعني على المؤسسة نفسها، على أرنوفا، أو على العمل في أمريكا بشكل كامل؟ السؤال الشق الثاني وشو كان؟ هل نعم، كونك مسلم يعني تقود منظمة بحثية بهذا الحجم، هل تأثرت أو انتقل التأثير إلى العمل الخيري الإسلامي سواء داخل أمريكا أو خارج أمريكا؟
So, two parts to that question, and Jazakallah khairan. It's a pleasure to be here and amongst brothers. One is, I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, when we as Muslims, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the number one way that we can do da'wah is through ourselves, right? So that's why the biggest jihad is our inner jihad. So, and all of us struggle throughout our lives to make ourselves better and to live. So within Arnova, people know, So within Arnova, people know that I'm Muslim. I don't hide it. It's very common. Everybody knows it. I've been very involved in Islamic work in America, and so it's no secret that I'm a Muslim. And so my hope is, by doing a good job, by being compassionate, by being humble, and by living Islamic values, people, when they will look at me, inshallah, they will not get a bad, exactly, that image of Islam. Hopefully, they will see me and they will see what is that this is what that good Muslims are like this. Inshallah, only Allah knows who is good and who is bad. So my approach in the organization is to make sure that, regardless of whether you are the president or whether you are a new member who has no job or anything, I treat everybody equal, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Hajj and Umrah, this is how, and this is, so I live Islamic values as best as I can, and I'm sure I failed many times. So that's one thing, and that's one way. As the executive director of the leading scholarly association in our field, alhamdulillah, it's good to have someone, whether it's me or others who are Muslim, that can show a different perspective. It shows that Muslims can achieve. So I hope but it's, I'm sure I'm not perfect, and I'm sure I make many mistakes, and I just pray that my mistakes don't hurt the image of Islam. So that's on a personal level. In terms of Muslim philanthropy and in America and other places, the way I try to impact is 2-3 ways. The first is, since I'm Muslim and there are other young Muslims that are in the field, when they heard I was the executive director, they did some research and they found out I was Muslim, then they contacted me, and I can provide mentorship. So on a personal level, not through my office and so on, but through my mentorship, and I can connect them. And there are some young Muslims that are scholars, I can then connect them with other people that I know because of my job. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I can come to events like this. When you're traveling for 3 weeks, I get invitations to go all over the world. But my board understands I have a passion for Islam and philanthropy and so on, and the fact that I've been invited by Saudi Arabia and so on, by some brothers here, this is another way. I can come and do this. It's a way that I can do khidmat. I'm here because I think if I can help you, I'm helping the rest of the Muslim community, because Saudi Arabia is a central pillar in that. The third way, it's not through my job at Arnova, but because of the credibility I have as the executive director of Arnova, I started a center on American Muslim philanthropy. We have 3 initiatives. One is research. So we are launching a new journal on Muslim philanthropy and civil society, and our board, the editorial board, are the leading scholars in this field. David Horton Smith is on our board. The dean of the Lilly School of Philanthropy is on our board. El-Nur Ibrahim from Harvard is on our board. Barbara Ibrahim she used to be at American University at Cairo. So we have people that are known within the field that are in that editorial board. So that our journal will come out, inshallah, initially it'll be once a year. This year it'll come out in October. And we have a book project. The second thing is we're starting an association for Muslim non-profit professionals. Inshallah, all of you will become members, because worldwide. So that's the second thing, best practices and so on. The third thing is strategic philanthropy. How do we make philanthropy more effective? And we are trying, our vision is in the long run to start the first Muslim American Community Foundation. And we'll talk later about, if you want, you can, about what community foundations are. But these are some small ways that, alhamdulillah, and my dissertation was on American Muslim philanthropy. And I write, so I went to China, I'm having a chapter published in Chinese. I wrote the English, I don't know how the translation will come out, but it's on Islam and philanthropy. I've written a couple of chapters in books, and IU Press, and I can send those by email, on Islam and philanthropy. So on my personal level, I'm a nonprofit management, government, and leadership. That's my focus. But my audience of research is Muslims. So this way I do research on the practice, but hopefully inform.
أنا أتوقع الحقيقة هذا يعني آثار رائعة جدا لم تكن لتحصل بعد توفيق الله عز وجل لولا وجود الدكتور شارق يعني في هذا المكان الرائع. ناخذ من الضفة الغربية. شو ما شاء الله تسمحون يا شباب نعطيهم فرصة. تفضل إبراهيم.
جزاك الله خير دكتور شارق على ما قدمت. الله سبحانه وتعالى يجعله من حسنات. خلال هذا المؤتمر اللي ما شاء الله يعني يعقد من سنوات والى مستقبل ان شاء الله 2022 يعني مخططين له الان، هل هناك مواضيع لكل مؤتمر مستقل؟ هو ذكر في مسارات، هل في مجال واحد او تطرق جميع المجالات اللي في العمل الخيري؟
في كل مؤتمر.
في كل مؤتمر، هل هو مؤتمر متخصص في مجال واحد له مسارات او ان لا كل ما يتعلق بالعمل الخيري في كل عام تطرح مواضيع جديده ومواضيع؟
طيب الأستاذ إبراهيم يستفسر فقط عن هل هناك يعني محور أساسي كبير لكل مؤتمر المؤتمرات القادمة، هو عبارة عن أو موضوع مفتوح أو أي موضوع ممكن يقبل ثم تقسم هذه المواضيع داخل في كل مؤتمر في محاور محددة، I think you answered this.
We have a main theme, and so if you look at the call for papers that are, you have one main theme, but then we also have many subtopics. But what we say is, just because we have a main theme, if you're not writing that, doesn't mean that you're not included. We'll just, we have 400 plus panels, but we do have a main theme. There are years that, I'll give you one example. There in Colorado, out of 450 panels, nearly 80 to 100 were related to our main theme. Last year, out of 450, maybe it was 40-50. So depending on the theme, the main topic can be many papers or it can be few papers. But the most a conference theme is no more than 15-20% of the conference. 80% is for everybody, because we want to create this platform that is open. The theme is only to get the juices running.
ومحمد كان عندك سؤال؟
الحقيقة عندي يعني إضافة على ما ذكر الدكتور، وأيضا طلب من الدكتور أنه يعلق على جانب جيد شفته في المؤتمر، وأيضا شيء يعني أعجبني مستغرب يمكن عندنا لكنها يعني وجدتها. بالنسبة للحقيقة الوفد السعودي اللي تكلمت عنه اليوم، يعني وجد إشادة حتى في اللقاء الرئيسي أثنوا على الوفد الرئيسي وأنا سمعت ذلك بنفسي. وأيضا الدكتور أيضا سمعت من قادة arnova شخصيا ثناء عليه شخصيا أن خلال السنتين اللي مسكها نقل arnova نقلة يعني جيدة جدا يعني حسب انطباعهم. ما أعجبني في المؤتمر أن حجم المؤتمر هذا الكبير ليس كما هو معتاد عندنا أن الشخص لازم يكون إحنا كمنظمين مؤتمر يعني مسؤولين عنه مسؤولية تامة، لا هو مسؤول عن نفسه. يجي يعطونا كيسة بسيطة عند الاستقبال وهو اللي يروح يحدد وين بيحضر وين بيتجه ووش بيحضر، وليس العكس كما هو حاصل عندنا. كان يعني كنترول عالي من قبل المنظمين، بل كنترول دائما عند الشخص نفسه. شيء عجيب أعجبني أن رسوم المؤتمر مو فقط المشاركين اللي يدفعوها، حتى أعضاء مجلس arnova كلهم سددوا الرسوم عشان يحضرون، واللي ما يسدد ما يحضر، بما فيهم أعضاء المجلس. ما في يعني مجاملات أو كذا، وهذه تأكدت من دكتور شارق شخصيا، وهذه الحقيقة كانت جميلة. أكثر ما أبهرني في arnova بالنسبة لهذا الإبداع، يوجد تطبيق للمؤتمر تستطيع من خلاله تحدد حضورك، وين المسارات اللي بتحضرها، خطة حضورك للملتقى كاملة، المناسبات اللي بتنزل في المؤتمر أول بأول تنزل، أخبار. أيضا لو حبيت تشبك مع أحد أو تلتقي مع أحد تسوي تشاتنج من خلال التطبيق. يعني الحقيقة فأتمنى أيضا الدكتور أيضا يعطي إضافة عليه. حبيت بس يعني أعطي إضاءة على المؤتمر وخاصة إني حضرته، وأتمنى أن الدكتور يقدم أيضا إضاءة على التطبيق تحديدا ورسوم.
جزاك الله خير. الأستاذ موسى الموسى يتكلم، والمهندس موسى الموسى يعني يثني الحقيقة على المؤتمر بشكل عام، وأيضا كذلك لفت انتباه عدة نقاط، من أبرزها أن هناك إشادة لشخصك الكريم يعني من قبل المسؤولين في المؤتمر، وأن هناك فارق ملحوظ خلال السنتين الماضيتين التي أشرفت فيها على المؤتمر، فجزاك الله خير. وأيضا هناك إشادة للوفد السعودي تم من خلال يعني أظن إحدى الجلسات الرئيسية داخل في الجلسة الرئيسية في المؤتمر. شد انتباه المهندس موسى كذلك البساطة في التنظيم، وأن هناك يعني حرية وهامش من المرونة في أن الإنسان الحاضر هو الذي يدير نفسه بنفسه من خلال يعني من خلال ما يختاره في المسارات وفي الدورات أو المناسبات الموجودة. شد انتباه كذلك أن حتى أعضاء مجلس الإدارة المشرفين على arnova ملزمين بدفع الرسوم كذلك، فهذا شيء جيد الحقيقة. وأن هناك تطبيق على الهاتف الكفي أيضا يعني في نوع من التفاعل، وتستطيع أن تستفيد بشكل أكبر. ويريد كذلك أن يعني تعطي بعض التفصيل عن التطبيق مثلا، وعن قضية الرسوم، هل هناك وراءها فلسفة معينة لديكم أم لا؟
Jazakallah khairan. I loved the fact that the Saudi, as a Muslim, I was very happy with the Saudi delegation. My only regret was that I could not spend more time, and I could not do more for the delegation because I was so busy. But I was so pleased, and Jazakallah khairan. Nobody at Arnova, other than those that are scholarship recipients, are free. So our young scholars, our scholarships are really focused on people that can't afford it. So we have 40 scholarships. Out of the 850, we have 40 scholarships for people that have to write a letter, present, prove that they have financial need, and then based on that, we give them scholarship for the conference. When I say scholarship, they get basically conference registration fee and maybe $200 stipend. Our students that we're trying to, because we're building, and students don't have the money, but all of our members, the president, the board members, all the committees, even the conference co-chairs, without whom the conference can't happen, all the conference committee, peer reviewers, all those people, everybody has to, at Arnova, you can only come if you're a member of Arnova. So that costs money. They have to be a member first in order to serve. They have to pay for their registration fees. And we don't provide, the only person that gets free hotel is the president, and the only reason why the president gets free hotel is the hotel provides us it for free. So we have a free hotel room, so the president gets it. But with the exception of that, everybody pays. Of course, staff doesn't pay, alhamdulillah, because we have to be there. But nobody at the conference is free. The board, and this came up for discussion many times, and every single time someone suggested it, the board voted it down, saying no. If we are going to be part of it, we are in this position to serve, not to be served. And so that's a very important thing. And this is very consistent across scholarly. I'm part of the American Council of Learned Societies. So all the scholarly associations in America are part of this. And all the executive directors meet twice a year. And this is across the board. This is the thing. The app is something that we just started 2 years ago, was for the first time. It was a company that everybody uses. And then last year, I worked with a Muslim brother. It's a Muslim company that is based on Silicon Valley. The back end is in Pakistan. And I know this company because when I was at ISNA, they were wanting to get into the market of events. So I consulted with them, and as a volunteer. This was a Muslim brother, and I wanted to help. And so basically what I did was I provided them with the design, not that I don't have no technical ability, but the design of how a conference registration system should be. So if you come to the Islamic Society of North America, Islamic Relief, Association of Pakistani Physicians North America, BMW, a lot of Silicon Valley, this company now does the work for them. So they then came to me last year, 2 years ago, that we're developing an app and we would like to enter the scholarly market. And so they approached us, and Arnova has an app with them. Brother Musa was there. The app was very successful. It has the contact information, it has all the abstracts, has all the attendees, has all the information, you can develop rather than taking the book everywhere, you can go through the app, choose your sessions, and put it, and you can have your own schedule. So then you don't have to worry about the book. In fact, even as executive director, I've had this backpack, by the way, for like 15 years. People make joke of me that as executive director, I should have a briefcase, but I'm habit of my book bag. But I have the book in but I never use it because I have the app. The app really has revolutionized, and a lot of our members use it. The other advantage of the app is it's really good data collection. So we had surveys on there for our strategic planning. We had our evaluation surveys there. When we had an announcement, we would put it on the board in the past. Now we just shoot the email out, and everybody who has an app gets that. The app has revolutionized our conference, and Arnova is behind this. Most people have started using apps many years ago. And I can provide information about this company. It's Muslim brother. His name is Hassan Tariq, to anybody. He's a very good brother.
الفترة هذه أيها الأحبة أتوقف لأن انتهت الآن. احنا عندنا بريك تقريبا لمدة 10 دقائق. نرجع تقريبا على الساعة 2:30 إن شاء الله، ثم نستأنف القسم الأخير. وما زال في يعني جعبة الدكتور شارق الحقيقة الكثير من يعني المعلومات لكيفية إنجاح المنظمات المؤتمرات الكبيرة. فحياكم الله إن شاء الله بعد 10 دقائق من الآن، وأنا أستأذنكم إذا أحب أنا بنصرف، عندي بس رحلة. سوف يستمر معنا الأخ علاء إن شاء الله، يستمر معكم إن شاء الله حتى ينهي الفترة الثالثة والأخيرة. يعطيكم العافية.
نتكلم عن بعض الإجراءات التي يعني يقومون بها في التجهيز للمؤتمر، وكيفية استقبال الأوراق الرسمية والمسارات وغير ذلك. أتوقع أنا بالضبط يعني أقل من نصف ساعة يعني سأتكلم فيها الدكتور بالضبط عن كيفية التمويل، وهل هم يواجهون مشاكل في التمويل للمؤتمر. والنقطة الأخرى المخرجات المؤتمر. والنقطة الأخيرة إن شاء الله يعني هل التوصيات العامة أولا للجهات الخيرية التي تنظم بعض الفعاليات عموما سواء مؤتمرات أو أقل من ذلك. والنقطة الأخيرة التوصيات التي يخرجون بها من المؤتمر كيف تفعل على الأرض. تفضل الدكتور إن شاء الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So the first thing, I know the question was asked was, how is our funding structured for the arnova?
So how is our conference funding structured? Arnova's conference is funded through 3 specific areas. Number one, conference registration fees. People that attend, we get registration for them, and that represents an important part. Actually, it's a big part. Probably 2/3 of our conference funding comes from them. The second is we have exhibitors and advertisers and those kinds of things. So advertising pays for the conference book. We have ads in the app and so on. So advertising and those exhibitors, that's a second group. It's a very small piece of money. It's not a lot of money. I think our conference budget is around $350,000, of which 200,000 or so comes from registration. Only 10 to 15,000 comes from the exhibitors and advertising. Really, the exhibitors and advertising is not really a source of revenue. It's not thought in that way. We do it as a service. When you're coming to this conference, you want to meet publishers. You want to meet certain organizations. But at the same time, if we made it free, everybody would be there. Then we wouldn't have any space. So it's a way in which we kind of control that. So but exhibit brings some revenue, and that's important revenue. Then one of the models we changed a few years ago when I came in is because we are, alhamdulillah, the United States is big, everybody wants us to come to their city. We opened a process. If you want us to come to your city, you can bid. You have to make a commitment and say, you should bring to arnova to this conference because this is the value it brings. In terms of what it will do for the local institution. For example, we're going to Grand Rapids, Michigan 2 years from now because it's their 25th anniversary. So they said, look, if you come to Grand Rapids, it's going to help our program to say, look, 25 years, even all these scholars are coming and celebrating us. And that's an important mission because we're about building the field. So they have to talk about that. They have to be able to show that they will be able to recruit volunteers. They also have to show that they can build a coalition. And most importantly, not most, but equally important, is they have to come up with money. And usually it's $50,000 to $100,000. Not just by themselves, but they have to. And they're different models. When we went to Indiana, last year we were in Indiana. Indiana gave us $50,000 to be institutional host. When we're going to Washington, D.C., we have 10 institutions giving us $5,000 each. And then the other 50,000 comes from our national sponsors. Like Indiana is our national sponsor, Baruch College is a national sponsor, Sage is our publisher is a national sponsor, and there are others. So we get around $100,000 in sponsorship money. And those 3 combined build our conference so that our goal is not to make money off the conference. We're a membership association. but it is to break even. And inshallah, starting this 2 years ago, we started breaking even. I think 2 years ago we made $100, and this year I think we make maybe $10 from the conference. So that's the funding part. The output part. The output part is complicated by the fact that when a scholar presents their research, that's their copyright. So arnova can't take their research and then put it out. So a lot of people ask me, can we have papers? And we always tell them, and one of the reasons why we made the app available is reach out to the scholar and ask them to send you the paper. Because they can give you, but arnova doesn't have, we don't own that copyright. But we do 2-3 things, and this year we're going to expand them more. First, if you go to our website in the next week or two, and you can see the previous ones, we have something called Catalog of Research. All the abstracts are available in searchable form in PDF. So that's one. The second, starting this year, we audio taped a bunch of sessions, and those will be available. Next year, when you propose, this year our conference, by the way, the conference proposal system is open. It'll close in April. So if you want to propose, make sure you put that in. You will have an option. I am willing to let my paper, my presentation to be audio taped. So those people that agree, because it's copyright, we don't want to hurt a member, those that opt in, we will record through audio, and those will be made available through our website. The third thing is that this is going to be new this year. We are going to ask in October, end of November, all those people presenting papers, are you willing to, everybody is going to have to submit their paper. In the past, they did not submit it to us. They only gave us abstracts and so on. We approved it, and then they gave their papers to the chairs of the sessions and their other participants so that they can read them and discuss them. We are now going to ask them to upload them into our system, and we're going to put a checkbox there. Yes, you can share my paper through your website. No, you cannot. So those people that opt in because of copyright reasons, we will then also link onto our to the website. But we're going to the other initiative that we are starting this year, which is going to be interesting, is called arnova Talks. So let's say you make a presentation, you publish research and so on. If you sign up and you go in, you can speak in 7 minutes. You have to summarize your research and your suggestions. We're going to audio tape them, and it's like TED Talks, but we're making it arnova Talks, and that's another way. So that's one way to produce output. The final thing, and the reason I'm talking a little faster is because I think a lot of these things will come out in Q&A. The final piece is output and enforcing recommendations. Arnova really takes our evaluations very seriously. So when you turn in your evaluations, one of the staff members, one of my staff members is Muslim. Her name is Fatma Hussain. She's a genius on communication, marketing. Actually, our website, all the stuff that you see, our newsletter, she does all of this, mashallah. One of the things she does is she takes all these evaluations and creates a marketing report. This is what people liked. This is what people didn't like. These are some suggestions. So that's one piece. Then our board on Saturday, our conference ends Saturday at noon. And at 2 o'clock, our board meets. And we have a board meeting, and one of the major items on the agenda is what went right, what went wrong, and so on. And so one of the things, and we take all these notes together, we figure out which ones we can implement, which ones we can fix. Like I told you, we changed our sessions used to be during lunch, the plenary session, opening and closing. But people said we didn't like it. We couldn't hear the speaker when we're eating. It's complicated. So we removed it, and that was the thing. And many plenaries came from our members and so on. And based on that, we make a list of those, and as many of those things we can implement. Some things are not possible because of specific reasons, and maybe it's financial, maybe it doesn't. But a big chunk of what we can, we try to make happen. And one of the things that I'm very pleased as an executive director in my organization, one of the best compliments my board member could present to me on Saturday was one of the board members said, Shadiq, one of the things that we are very happy is that this year's conference represents follow-through. So Chicago was the implementation of all the things that the board had identified and the evaluations had identified as changes, and we implemented all of them this past year in Chicago. So inshallah. So we take those very, very seriously, those people that fill out the evaluations and so on, because the only way you're going to be successful and the only way you're going to, you know, we're a market-driven place. If we don't listen to our audience will go to other places. And so those are some ways that we fulfill the recommendations of the conference. And with that, I'll open it up for questions in a second.
الدكتور يعني انتهى سريعا بحيث انه احنا نفتح مجال للاسئله انه تبقى تقريبا ربع ساعه فتفضل استاذ.
مداد هذه ثالث شيء من الاشياء اللي عجبني هناك. يعني انا ما مرت علي ما ادري هل هي مقصوده ولا هذا ممكن نسال الدكتور ان ياتي باحث ويقدم ورقته ويقول اني فشلت وساعدوني كيف ممكن احصل على نجاح افضل من هذا النجاح. هل هذه كانت مقصودة أو من يعني مبادرة من الباحث؟ كأني فهمت أنه متاح أن بعض الباحثين يذكر فشله وأنه أيضا يحاور الموجودين حتى يصل إلى أفضل الطرق للنجاح في البحث.
وملاحظة يعني كان لاحظها في المشاركة في المؤتمر الماضي أن بعض الباحثين يعني يقول أنه شارك وفشل. حالة واحدة؟ نعم. يقول حالة يعني وواجهها يعني أو لقاها أن بعض الباحثين أو يعني هو الباحث يعني قال انه تقدم بالورقه ثم فشل وسالكم يعني ان توجهوه لكيف ان ينجح في المره القادمه، فهل هذا شيء مقصود او يعني سياسه متبعه من ارنوفا في المؤتمر ام هو كان شيء عرضي يعني؟
So if I get your question correct, there was a scholar who presented and then he said that his research failed and that was part of the presentation. Is that correct? So not that it's done on purpose, but it happens. See, research starts from a hypothesis. Someone says this is what's going to happen. So for example, my hypothesis on something was that philanthropy goes up or down based on crisis or something like that. Then you test it through research, and then at the end of that testing you realize that your theory was wrong, that you failed in your theory. But the fact that you failed in that research says, even though that hypothesis failed, but for the scholarship, it's an important addition to scholarship. Because people should know that that's a failure, that's a tested failure and so on. So that happens. The other thing is that sometimes theories fail or research fails, not because the theory was incorrect, but the methodology was not correct or the resources are not correct. So that process is very important. And in a conference like ours, where you have young scholars, you have middle scholars and others, it's very important to present both failed as well as successful research. Research is, you know, it's a testing game. Some things work and some things don't. So I don't think it happens a lot, but it does. But it's an important part of the conference.
السؤال هو ورد في مسألة تتعلق بتقييم مدى نجاح المؤتمر العددي. والسؤال الثاني أهم ثلاث عوامل من وجهة نظر الدكتور من خلال 44 ما شاء الله ملتقى، أهم ثلاث عوامل يراها مؤثرة في نجاح الملتقيات بشكل عام.
سؤالين، السؤال الأول كيفية تقييم مدى نجاح المؤتمر من عدمه، والسؤال الثاني أهم ثلاث عوامل يعني أدت لنجاح المؤتمرات أو الفعاليات بشكل عام يعني على مدار تاريخ أرنوفا.
So the most important, the way I think you measure success beyond the evaluations and all these other things is whether those that attended are happy. So if the majority of your evaluations, most people will turn in their evaluation when they're very happy or when they're very upset, right? So when your evaluations come out strong, people go away happy. I think that's one measurement of success. There are others, financial and so on, that the board sets out, the management, logistics, and so on. But the number one thing that measures our success is the fact. The other one that I argue, this is when I write to Lily and the others about how we measure our success, is our membership. Our conference is growing. It went from 500 to 600 to 700 to 800. So that is another measurement over time that shows its success. So three factors that are very important. I think the first one is planning. You have to plan way in ahead in order to make a successful conference. I think 1 year is too short of a time. So I think you have to have a longer term strategy to do that. The second thing I think is important is a conference, an academic conference, especially in our field, where it's not just one discipline, it's not just scholars, it's practitioners and policy. It should resemble a buffet. I mean, I'm a big fan of buffets for dinner, right? So you go there, and on the buffet, you have items that you recognize, right? And I was in Egypt, and for the first time I saw this green dish. It was mulakhia. I'd never had it before. It was wonderful, right? So you have to have a buffet, and they are things that you know. Like there was hummus and falafel and all that, and I love that stuff. There were items that I did not know, mulakhia and so on. And then there were some items that the chef was preparing for me. Like, it was an interaction. And I think a conference has to be like a buffet. There should be something for everybody. That's the second. I think the third piece is that the conference is successful when the most important thing in the conference is the attendee. Far too often we focus on the organizers or the funders. I think the most important ingredient for a conference is the attendees. If there's no audience, there's no conference. Which means that attendee-centered conference is very, very different. It means that you're engaging with them in order to build that conference. So I would think these are three broader things. There are many others, but these are three things that I think are very important. I think one other thing, and this comes from me as a Muslim, all of us as a Muslim. I think Muslim values are very important in making a good conference. The fact that at our conference, and Brother Musa was there, I smiled throughout the conference. This is an essential ingredient in Islam. You smile. By smiling, it's sadaqah jariyah. And I think if you train all your volunteers, your staff, we train them to smile. It's a sadaqah jariyah. That's one. The second thing I think is important is treat everybody equal. The best scholar and the youngest scholar, I can guarantee if you talk to both of them, they will say that when they came talk to me, I treated them equally. I think that it's like Hajj. You're wearing the Umrah, nobody knows who is rich, who is not. We're all wearing the same thing. So I think that equality, and that's that third point that I talked about, the attendant-centered, that's what I mean, is we treat them equally, we treat them with honor, we treat them with respect, we value them, and we make it the best possible experience. There's always going to be some problems, someone's food or this and that, but we have to be responsive to them.
يعني هو يعطيه العافية اهتم كثيرا بالاستفادة للملتقى، لكن هل عندهم فكرة نقل الملتقى بمكان ثاني نفس الملتقى يعني كلهم؟
خارج أمريكا. هو بيوافق كل سنة أمريكا بوقت الولاية. أنا تقصد خارج أمريكا؟ أنا أبغى أرنوفا الآن هو يقام أرنوفا نسخة من أرنوفا في مكان ثاني في نيوزيلندا في الصين يعني تكرار أكثر من هذا. هل في اقتراح أو في تفكير يعني في نقل؟
So people have said, can we have a conference in Arnova, in Middle East or Gulf? I think in order for us to do that, there would have to be 2 or 3 central ingredients. First, the group in our members, and you have to be a member, and membership you just can go online and become members. But our membership from that region should come to us and say, there is value in us doing this. We don't want to just do an event just for the sake of having an event. If there's something else that's happening locally, we don't want to take away. In Africa, we're doing it because the African group said it will help our initiative if you do yours with us. So we said, okay, because it's building the field, we'll do it. So if you can make the case as members that doing a conference in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, wherever, it can build the field, that I think would be one thing. The second piece is that there has to be an agreement that the peer review process has to be the same, because Arnova's name is there, the quality and so on. The third piece is very important, is funding. Arnova doesn't have discretionary funding for this, so we're going to Africa because Ford is funding it. We're talking about China because China is their institutions. So there would be an interest, and it's part of our strategic planning process. That's a broader question for the conference. There are smaller things that we can do that we have been doing. We did in Ghana, we're doing in Nigeria, we've done in China. Let's say you want to have a workshop on how can we successfully get Saudi or Arab or Gulf scholars to publish in NVSQ. That is not an expense. Bringing conference is expensive, but that means you can pay for 2 to 3 to 4 airline tickets, hotels for the people while they're there. We can become the editors of the journals to the region. you can advertise, bring it, and put together a whole event, and it's going to cost you whatever the cost of 2-3 airline tickets and the hotel is going to be, right? So we can do small initiatives like that, which are easier. You can say, can you do this? And I can reach out to all my members, find 2 or 3 good people, and good quality, reputable, and we can do that. If you want to do a workshop on research methods, I can reach out to someone, do a workshop. That doesn't cost anything. You're doing all the organization and so on. That's a second. If you want to do a workshop on how do you teach nonprofit management, case studies and so on. So these are smaller things that we can do that are not as big as a conference, so we can do both. This piece, it's easier. You just propose it. As long as the funding is there, we won't do it unless we find the right people, right? Quality is really important. It's the Arnova name and so on. And so there are times where someone comes to me and says, can we do this? I do the feasibility, and I don't think I can deliver the quality that we need. Then we tell them, I'm sorry, we can't do it. And then I give them someone else's name, that maybe they can do it better. But those are 2 ways. The conference is harder, but can be done with those 3 ideas. The workshops are easier, and it's still difficult to do, but it's a lower cost. It's a lower investment.
حياك الله دكتور ان شاء الله. بس ودينا التركيز على قسم التوصيات، كان بالنسبه لي قد يكون في لبس بين اخذ الملاحظات او تقييم المنطقه كتنظيم او توصيات المخرجات التوصيات اللي بتكفل فيها في التنفيذ. شكرا.
السؤال يعني هل ممكن يكون بس حدث لبس ما بين المخرجات المؤتمر والتوصيات لتلك المخرجات غير تقييم الحاضرين، يعني التوصيات نفسها التي يخرج بها المؤتمر يعني.
Yes. So to differentiate the outputs and the recommendations, the output is what is the impact of the conference, right? So the main thing that the conference produces is scholarly discussion, right? And scholarly research and papers. And so because the scholarly research and papers belong to the person who did the scholarship, we have to have their permission to add it. So there are certain things that we can provide to the world. One is the abstracts. That's open to everybody. We have permission to share that. The second thing is certain talks can be taped, either video or audio. Audio is cheaper and easier because you can download it as podcast. But they have to be by permission. The third thing is the papers, which they can give to us and we can submit. Most of the time, what we tell people is right now when someone reaches me, contact the paper presenter, and if they will give you permission, they will send the paper to you. So those are the major outputs that we have currently and that we're building on. We are building this new Arnova talk model where you can come and talk, and rather than you reading a 35-page paper, you can just listen to a 5-7 minute discussion about that. And then if you think it's interesting, you can then read the full paper. So those are some of the outputs that we have currently and working. And the biggest challenge with all of this is copyright. So even routinely people ask me, how can I get the journal that we have? Can we? And because like I said, we get royalty money for it. Sage is a publishing company; they make money off it. So we have to be very careful about how that process works for the outputs. So those are the main outputs that we have currently from Arnova. Now, of course, the scholars that come and they listen and they learn and they make their papers better, they then will go on and publish. So one of the interesting things that you can do is you can look at the catalog of research, and then if you look in EBSCOhost and so on, you'll see many of those articles with that same title or similar title were published. So we don't document that, but that's a process that we know, because that's the whole purpose of this. You come in, you share your research, and then once you refine it and make it better, you publish it. So that's on the output side. The recommendations part of it is we don't have any broad conference recommendations like the U.S. government should do this or global philanthropy should we do this, because that's not our role. Because one of the moment Arnova starts saying do this, doing that, the people that don't agree will not come. We want to provide a platform where everybody comes and says what they say and provides them the capacity and so on, and they'll do that. So we don't have those kinds of recommendations. We have mostly recommendations on what topics should be future should be used in the future? How can we make our conference better? How can we make the conference experience better? So our recommendations are largely focused on how do you make this event a better event in terms of intellectual content, in terms of themes and topics, but also about logistics. Does that? And thank you.
سؤال أخير فقط عشان بس الوقت. تفضل.
السلام عليكم. هل أرنوفا لديها شراكات مع معاهد أو جامعات خارج الولايات المتحدة خصوصا يعني منطقة الشرق الأوسط يعني يمكن من خلالها يعني منح درجات علمية في مجال العمل الخيري والإنساني؟
يسأل هل أرنوفا تملك شراكات مع جامعات خارج أمريكا خاصة منطقة الشرق الأوسط؟ هذه الجامعات أو الجهات الأكاديمية تمنح يعني درجة الماجستير أو الدكتوراه في العمل الخيري؟
We don't have formal partnerships, actually, even in the US. The way we determine partnerships and so on is through memberships. So we do have members from Saudi Arabia, from Kuwait, from the Muslim world, and so on. And those can be both individual. We have two kinds of members. You can be individual members or institutional members. And institutional membership basically allows the institution to become a member, but then 3 of their staff also automatically become members as part of it. So most people become institutional members for 2 reasons. One, to support arnova, because their name is listed as an institutional member. But second, it reduces the cost of membership. So, because our membership, by the way, is not everybody pays the same. It's based on income, and it's based on honor system. If you make so many US dollars, you pay this much. If you make this much, and so on. So we have some, but not as many as I would like. I should have said this initially. Of our membership, I would say 70 to 80% of our membership, because membership changes from year to year and so on. 70 to 80% of our membership is from the North America, US and Canada. The remaining is from Europe, Australia, Asia, all the other, Latin America. Our weakest is Asia, Africa, but that's what through the Ford Foundation will become very strong. In Asia, the predominance largely has been on China, Japan, because they have the resources. The Muslim world has been behind mainly because of resources. So we don't have any formal the only formal partnership we have is with Indiana University, and we have an agreement with them because we are housed there. And actually this is a tradition within American scholarly societies. Employees of a society, even though they report to a board, they are employees of a university, because universities provide benefits and so on and all these kinds of things. So it's a way to retain staff for longer. Does that help?
في الختام نشكر مؤسسة عبد الرحمن بن صالح الراجحي على رعاية هذه الندوة، ونشكر باسمها وباسم مداد دكتور شارق على المعلومات يعني أضافها لنا يعني وسعة صدره يعني على الأسئلة، ونشكر أخيرا الحضور يعني بمداخلاتهم التي أثرت يعني الندوة، وجزاكم الله خيرا. وإن شاء الله بإذن الله الغداء عشان البوفيه، بس الدكتور يعني بما أن الدكتور يعني يفضل البوفيه فننتقل للبوفيه إن شاء الله بإذن الله. بإذن الله. جزاكم الله خير. جزاكم الله خير.